The priest pressed his hand to my chest, spoke the words that had marked every royal of Highmoor since the founding, and waited for the goddess to answer. Nothing came. No light, no warmth, none of the gift settling into the bone the way the whole court had watched it settle into my brothers when it was their turn. The priest waited. He tried the words again, and then a third time, and by the third, his hand was trembling against me. He turned to my father and admitted it in a small voice. No gift had been bestowed. He had never seen such a thing in all his years of service, and he could not explain it. My father did not ask why. He rose from his high seat, looked at me for exactly as long as it took to be done with me, and named me worthless in front of the entire court. Goddess forsaken. A stain the bloodline would have to wash out. He said my punishment would be announced, and then he walked out without looking back. The hall stayed silent after he left. A few hundred nobles stood around me and found, all at once, that the safest thing in the room was the floor. Not one of them met my eyes. Yesterday, I had been the third prince of Highmoor, 19 years old. Now I was a problem they were waiting to see carried out the door. I did not say anything. There was nothing left to say. The sentence came the next morning. I was made Lord of the Deadlands. It sounded almost like mercy until you knew what the Deadlands were. They were a stretch of cursed ground in the far north, choked with miasma, where nothing grew and no one had lived for longer than anyone could remember. Sending a man there was sending him to die. Calling him its lord only meant no one had to say the word exile out loud. I protested. I will not pretend I was calm about it. I told my father that giving a man no gift was not the same as a man committing a crime, and that whatever the goddess had decided about me, I had done nothing to earn a death dressed up as a title. I asked him not to throw me away. He answered that a royal command could not be overturned, and that the matter was closed. He never raised his voice. He did not need to. He was a devout man, my father, and to him, the goddess's mark was the only proof of worth that counted. A son she would not touch was no son at all, only an embarrassment he wanted out of his sight. He was finished with me, the way you are finished with a thing that has stopped working. So I stopped asking. Arguing with him felt like asking for his opinion, and I had decided I was done doing that for the rest of whatever life I had left. Something in me went quiet and hard and stayed that way. Nolan found me before I could leave. He had been waiting for it. He did not bother hiding it anymore. He told me, smiling the whole time, that he was the one who had spent years whispering in our father's ear, the one who had arranged for the giftless prince to be quietly swept somewhere he could never embarrass the family again. He had hated me for a long time, he said. He told me our mother had wasted all her softness on me while she lived, and now that she was gone, there was no one left to waste any on me at all. I had grown up next to that hatred. I knew where it came from. It was not really about a gift. It was that I never tried to be louder than him, and somehow that made him feel small. Then he turned to Lila and offered her a place in his household. A real one, he said, not a dead man's. Lila stepped half in front of me before he had finished the sentence. I will not serve you, she said. That was all. Long silver hair, sharp eyes, and a flat no with nothing soft in it. He sneered something about her choosing to rot in the ash beside a reject, and how he would enjoy hearing how long the two of us lasted. And while he talked, something answered at my fingertips. It was faint. A spark struck off cold iron, there and gone before I could even look down. A power I had told no living soul about, waking on its own, as if it knew before I did that everything was about to change. I closed my hand and let it go quiet. If my brother had any idea what the goddess had actually put in me, he would not be exiling me at all. He would lock me in a workshop and keep me, useful and owned, for the rest of my life. Exile was the closest thing to freedom I had been handed in 2 lifetimes. I was not about to trade it for the look on his face, so I let him gloat. I let him think he had won. He would learn otherwise eventually. I could wait. The carriage smelled of cold iron and old straw, and the road north got worse with every mile, like the kingdom itself was trying to forget where it was sending me. Lila sat across from me with her hands folded, watching me the way she always did, as if I might break if she blinked. I told her I was all right and she did not need to worry. She did not believe me. She did not stop watching either. I had time to think on that road, so I thought about the first time I had died. In another world, another life, I had been an ordinary office worker who logged more than 300 hours of overtime in a single month, until one evening, my heart simply stopped at my desk, and that was the end of it. No drama, just a man worn down to nothing by people who only ever saw the work he could do. The goddess had met me after that, in an endless white space, and sent me here as a newborn with one thing tucked quietly into my soul, a skill, auto-creation. I had grown up keeping it folded out of sight, a a prince with no gift and no talent for sword or spell, and I had let every one of them believe that was the whole of me. I watched the green drain out of the land mile by mile and turn to gray. The dead country came up to meet us. I thought, with no drama at all, that it could be mine, the first thing in either life that ever would be. The place they had left for me was a hut more than 50 years old and barely upright, leaning into the wind on cracked gray ground that stretched flat and empty to the horizon. Lila looked at it and said it was a wonder anything this far north still stood at all. She offered, lightly, that if it got cold, we could simply keep each other warm. I brushed past it without quite meaning to, and her face fell for half a second before she tucked it away. I did not have time to fix that yet. The ruin would not survive a night, and in the Deadlands, the things that come out after dark are the reason no one lives here. We needed real walls before the sun finished going down, so I made them. I had never used the skill in front of another person, but Lila had chosen this road with me when she could have walked into my brother's warm house instead. I asked her to fell some trees from the dead stand at the field's edge. She drew her sword and took down 5 trees with a single stroke each, clean through the trunk, like she was cutting reeds. I noted that, and I said nothing about it. A maid does not do that. I filed it away for another day. Then I knelt by the wood and the loose field stone, and I called the skill up by name. Auto-creation answered the way it always did, quiet and exact. I held the house in my mind, the whole of it, and the skill laid the cost out plain in my thoughts, the way another man might read a list. Stone for the foundation, timber for the walls, the floor, the rafters, the roof. It took what I had gathered and it asked for nothing I did not have. The ground shook once, softly. Stone climbed up out of the dead earth and squared itself into a foundation. The felled logs lifted off the dirt on their own, stripped smooth, and slotted together course by course, faster than my eye could follow. Walls rising where a moment before there had been only flat gray nothing. A floor sealed itself. Rafters crossed overhead. A roof closed over the top like a lid set down gently on a box. The wind that had been cutting straight through us a breath earlier hit a solid wall and went around. In the time it takes to tell it, a finished house stood on ground that had grown nothing for half a century. Lila made a sound I had never heard from her. Then she crossed the distance between us and threw her arms around me, laughing, telling me the goddess must have understood exactly what I was worth, even if no one in that throne room ever had. I let her. I was looking at the house, and for the first time since the priest's hand went cold against my chest, the hard quiet thing in my chest loosened a little. Inside there was a living room with a table and a pair of chairs, and one bedroom with a single bed. I had built it without thinking the layout all the way through. I offered to raise a second room, or at least another bed. It would take seconds. Lila refused both before I finished offering. She argued very seriously that splitting us into separate rooms was all risk and no benefit, since she could hardly guard me through a wall, and that one bed was simply the most defensible arrangement. She delivered it like a tactician laying out a campaign. I was an adult in my last life. I had paid taxes and missed funerals for work, and somehow, here, I felt my ears go hot, and I gave up the argument like a boy. I agreed. I told myself it was easier than winning. We ate what little we had carried, and the lamp burned low, and for one night, nobody in the world knew where I was or cared. It was, strangely, the most peace I had felt in either life. I woke in the night to find Lila pressed close against my back, fast asleep, insisting even in her sleep that this was simply the correct distance for a maid to keep. I let it be and drifted off again, and then I was somewhere else. I knew the place at once. Endless white in every direction. No floor, no sky, no horizon. It was where I had met the goddess the first time, the day she sent me into this world. She was waiting for me, golden-haired, white-winged, a ring of soft light over her head, smiling like we were old friends picking up a conversation we had paused. "You have grown," she said, and then her smile folded into something guiltier. She told me she had never imagined her choice would cost me what it had. I asked the question I had carried since the rite. I asked if my skill was the reason no gift had come. She nodded. "It was the principle of this world," she explained. "One gift to a person, no more." Auto-creation had already taken that single place in me long before the priest ever laid a hand on my chest. There had been no room left for the goddess to give me anything at the rite, because she had already given me everything she could. Then she held out her hand. In it sat a small piece of metal that glowed a pale white gold, the light moving in it like something half alive. She called it divine metal. It was forbidden to bring down into the human world, she said, and no craftsman alive could work it. But my skill could. Only my skill could. She pressed it into my palm and told me it could hold a blessing the way a cup holds water, and that there was a sickness in the land that nothing else could ever wash clean. She did not name the thing that made the sickness. She only said it had been waiting a very long time, and that one day I would understand why she had given this to me and to no one else. She called me her favorite. She laid a blessing over me as well. Another power folded in beside the first, and she did not tell me what it did. Then she said she was glad it had been me, and the white began to fade. I woke with my hand already closed around something. When I opened it, the divine metal was sitting in my palm, glowing its pale white gold in the gray morning, exactly as it had in the dream. So it had been real. All of it had been real. I lay there a while and turned it over in my fingers and let myself understand what I was holding. A power no one knew about. A metal no one else in the world could touch. A piece of land everyone had written off as a grave. My father thought he had buried me. My brother thought he had won. They had handed me the one thing I had wanted across 2 whole lifetimes, and they had done it thinking it was the cruelest thing they could do. I did not plan to correct them. Let them keep believing it. The longer they thought I was dead out here, the more time I had to build before anyone came looking. I would tell no one what I meant to do with this ground. I would simply do it. Lila called from the other room that breakfast was ready, her voice bright in a way it never used to be allowed to be. I closed my hand over the metal and got up. The dead land was waiting outside the window, flat and gray and silent and mine. I had a second chance and a skill the world had thrown away, and for the first time I was somewhere no one could take either one from me. Good, I thought. Let it begin here. It began with a hoe and a patch of ground that wanted nothing to do with me. I'd made the hoe that morning. A stick, a flat stone, one thought, and auto-creation snapped them into a finished tool before I'd even pictured it. Then I walked out to the field behind the house and brought the blade down, the way I'd seen farmers do it in the lower villages. It skidded off the earth like I'd struck a paved road. I tried again, same thing. The dirt was gray and dry and packed hard, and it gave up nothing. Lila came over from the outdoor hearth where she'd cooked breakfast, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd said sorry twice that morning for the food being plain, nothing like the castle. I'd told her both times it was fine and meant it. Now she crouched beside me and ran the gray soil through her fingers. This wasn't tired land, she told me. It was poisoned. Long ago there'd been a war here, old enough that no one living remembered who had fought it or why, and it had left the whole region soaked in something called miasma. The stuff ate at living things, crops, animals, people, given long enough. Nothing grew in it because nothing was meant to. I ran appraisal across the ground, the reading skill the goddess had folded in with everything else. It answered like a page read aloud inside my skull, flat and certain. Miasma contaminated. Quality lowest. And then the line that made me sit back on my heels. Nothing short of a divine blessing would ever clean it. A divine blessing. I almost laughed. Then I remembered I was holding one in a cloth bundle inside the house. I fetched the divine metal and turned appraisal on it. The reading came back like a held breath. Rank, beyond measure. Quality, divine. And the part I'd missed in the dream, this metal could hold a blessing. It could carry one the way a lamp carries flame. So I made a hoe out of it. Lila watched me do it, and I think a part of her wanted to stop me. Divine metal was the kind of thing kings went to war over, and I was shaping it into a farm tool. But auto-creation took the metal and a length of wood and drew them together. And what stood in my hand when it finished was a hoe that glowed a soft, steady white, like it held a piece of mourning that didn't go out. I told Lila to watch. Then I swung it into the dead ground. The light went out of the blade and into the earth all at once. It ran outward from where I'd struck, a clean white tide moving through the dirt faster than I could step back from it, and the gray burned off ahead of it like fog burning off a lake. The hard-packed ground loosened. The haze of dust hanging over the field thinned and was gone. Where the light passed, the soil turned dark and soft and breathing, the kind of black earth I'd only ever seen in the kingdom's richest valleys. I knelt and put my hand in it. It was warm. Appraisal read it without my asking. Quality, divine. Land that would grow supreme crops and hold the goddess's protection over anyone who lived on it. And standing there with my hand in living dirt that had been a graveyard a breath before, I finally understood what I was holding. The miasma wasn't only here. Lila had said it was spreading, slow but spreading, year over year, reaching into farmland and forests and villages all across the world. The kingdoms knew it. They had no answer for it. No sword cut it. No spell burned it out. No priest prayed it away. The The land everywhere was dying by inches, and there was exactly one thing alive that could turn it back. This, a hoe, me. They'd branded me worthless and thrown me into the one wasteland in the world, and they'd handed me the only cure the world had. I didn't say any of that out loud. I turned to Lila instead and told her plainly that I was going to make this dead land live, all of it, and feed everyone we ever gathered here, and that no one was ever going to call this ground worthless again. She looked at me for a long moment, and then I did something I hadn't planned. I pulled her into a hug. She made a small, startled sound and went stiff, then very red, and didn't pull away. And for once, neither of us said anything clever about it. I didn't know any of this at the time. I learned it much later, and I'm telling it now because you should know who was watching. Far above the clouds, in a white country where the gods live, the goddess Hestia was bent over a crystal, watching me dig. She was delighted, and not quietly. Another goddess crossed the white toward her, Athena, war goddess, all composure where Hestia was all noise, and asked what had her so worked up. Hestia showed her the crystal and crowed that her chosen boy had taken divine metal, the stuff of god-killing weapons, and made a gardening tool out of it, and was using it to scrub a dead continent clean. Athena studied the image. She admitted she'd never have thought of it. The ones reborn from other worlds, she said, really did think sideways to everyone else. He saved me once, you know, Hestia said, leaning her chin on her hands. In his old world, she'd worn the shape of a small cat, half flattened in a road, and a tired young man had scooped her out of the way without a second thought. That was the whole reason she'd picked him. She admitted it freely, that she was biased, that she didn't care. Athena teased her for it, and Hestia shot straight back that Athena only ever chose pretty girls to stand beside her own hero, so neither of them had room to talk. Athena looked away at that, which was its own kind of answer. Then she said something Hestia didn't catch the weight of yet, that if she kept watching this boy, in time she'd understand. That Theo was tied to her hero more closely than either of them had planned, that she should look forward to it. Hestia just turned back to the crystal and cheered me on. I wish I could say I'd felt it. I didn't. I was filthy and out of breath and about to fall over. Because here was the problem nobody warns you about. A magic hoe purifies the ground in one stroke. It does not till it. That part is still arms and back and hours. And I had the arms and back of a prince who'd spent 2 lifetimes at a desk. I lasted about 5 minutes before the field tilted, and I sat down hard in my own miracle dirt. Lila was at my side instantly with the water skin, telling me to rest, that she'd do the rest of the work herself, and she would have. But I hadn't crawled out from under one life of being used up just to let the only person who'd followed me work herself into the ground in the next one. So I went looking for a different answer, and auto-creation had one. It could build a golem. I switched the skill to recipe mode, the way you'd flip to the back of a book, and it laid out what a golem needed: soil, rock, and a magic stone for a core, a large one, high grade, the kind Lila said you usually had to cut out of a monster. We didn't have a monster. We didn't have anything, except I did. Folded in cloth at the bottom of my pack was a brooch, and set in the brooch was a magic stone, and the brooch had been my mother's. She'd pressed it into my hand before she died, and told me to use it when I truly needed to, not to keep it pretty in a drawer. I'd kept it pretty in a drawer for years anyway. I held it for a while. Then I told myself she'd meant exactly this, and I think she would have, and I fed it into the skill before I could talk myself out of it. The ground in front of me drew itself upward. Soil and rock pulled together and packed tight, and rose, until something stood there taller than 2 men, broad through the shoulders, its whole body dark earth and gray stone, with a faint pale light burning slow where a heart would be. It looked down at me, then it knelt. Lila had her hand on her knife. When it didn't move except to wait, she let the hand fall. I told it to till the field. It took the hoe in one huge hand and went to work, and it worked at 10 times my speed and didn't slow and didn't tire, turning that black earth in long even rows while I sat and caught my breath and watched my mother's last gift dig my future out of the dirt. I named him Gorm. When I said it out loud, the light in his chest pulsed a little brighter, and I decided not to think too hard about whether a thing made of soil could be glad to have a name. By the end of that one day, Gorm had plowed and purified the whole stretch of land around the house. Then, Lila pointed out the next wall I'd walked us into. Seeds need water, and the only river near us still ran thick with miasma. The rain might be poisoned too. I'd half resigned myself to digging a well by hand when it occurred to me to just ask the skill. It could build a house. Why not a well? It could. Gorm cracked the big stones down to size, Auto creation took the stone and the open shaft and raised a finished well out of the ground between one breath and the next. And in the soil we pulled up doing it, there was ore. Appraisal read it as iron, good quality, the kind you'd normally have to haul to a smith and smelt. The skill didn't care about any of that. It took the raw ore straight and shaped me a hand pump fitted to the well, and when I worked the handle, clean water came up cold and clear. Appraisal called it drinkable. I drank it. It was. The three of us planted the seeds Lila had carried out of the castle, row after row, and watered them from the pump as the light went gold and then gray. A house, a well, water, a field, and a tireless hand to work it. All of it standing on ground that was supposed to be my grave. I went to bed that night, honestly unsure whether anything would come up at all. Divine dirt was one thing. I'd never grown so much as a weed in my life. I woke to Lila calling my name from outside, and the sound of it wasn't worried. It was something I hadn't heard out of her in a long time. I came out, and the field was green. Not sprouted, not started. Grown. Every row we'd put down the day before stood full and ripe in the morning light. Fat tomatoes flushed deep red, cabbages heavy as stones, eggplants gone glossy and dark, strawberries, watermelons swelling against the dirt. Overnight, on the land a kingdom had thrown away because nothing could live on it. I knelt at the nearest plant and ran appraisal over a tomato, more out of habit than doubt. The word came back, and I read it twice to be sure. Quality, supreme. I'd seen the word before. I'd never seen it attached to food. Supreme produce didn't reach common markets. It didn't reach most lords. It went to the royal table and nowhere else. And even there, it was rare. And here, it was hanging off a vine in dirt that had been poisoned the day before yesterday. I pulled it loose and bit into it. I have to be honest about what that did to me because it mattered more than it should have. It was just a tomato, but it was the best thing I had ever put in my mouth. Bright and sweet and so alive it almost hurt. Nothing like the tired, pale vegetables I'd grown up calling fresh. I stood there in the dirt chewing a tomato with my eyes stinging, and I knew with total certainty I was never going back to ordinary food again. Lila took one too. She went quiet, which for her was loud, and then said she'd never eaten anything like it in her life. Not at the castle, not anywhere. We harvested the day's share between us, while Gorm carried baskets that would have taken 3 men. At the cooking space, I made one more thing. Pulled a stone oven up out of raw stone with the skill, a real one, fit to bake and grill. So Lila would never have to crouch over that bare hearth again. She threw her arms around me before I'd even finished telling her what it was. She'd been doing that more, out here, with no one's eyes on her and no court to perform for. I'd stopped pretending I minded. She wanted to bake bread with it, the castle flour and the new vegetables. I went to fetch the flour and found, idly, that the skill could just make the bread itself, whole loaves out of nothing but the wheat. I decided not to mention that. The baking was hers. She didn't need me reaching in and doing it instantly, and taking the one thing that was hers to do. So I carried the flour back instead, and the smell of it started, and the field stood green behind us, where gray dust had been. They'd called the land worthless. They'd called me the same, in the same breath, in front of the whole court, and standing there with supreme food in my hands, and a kingdom's only cure humming under my sleeve. I thought, with no drama at all, that they had been wrong about both of us on the same day, and that this was only the first thing they'd been wrong about. It would not be the last. I had bread that morning, still warm, with vegetables off my own field, and a sauce Lila had made, and I caught myself thinking a man could get used to this. That was the problem. I had a house, a field, a well, and a golem. What I did not have was people. A territory with 2 residents, one of them made of dirt, is not a kingdom. It is a very good garden. I was turning over whether the coffee beans from the castle would grow out here, whether I could sell them south, when Gorm stood up. He did it all at once, the way he did everything, and put himself between me and the road. Lila was already moving. She told me to get back, low and fast, and her hand was on her sword before the word finished. A carriage came up the dead track from the south. It should not have. Nobody drove into the deadlands on purpose. It stopped a stone's throw from the house, and a man climbed down, narrow, well-dressed, a fox's ears laid flat with caution, and a fox's tail held very still. A beastman. He introduced himself before his feet were properly on the ground, smooth as oil. Said he was Roland of the Beastfang Trading Company, and he'd only come to see who in the world was living out here. Lila told him there was nothing to discuss, and he could turn his carriage around. She did not take her hand off the sword. The threat in her voice was polite and complete. I put a hand on her arm. "It's all right," I said. "Let him talk." I stepped past Gorm into the sun, where the merchant could see me, and gave him my name. Theo, 3rd Prince of Highmore, now Lord of these lands. Something in his face changed when I said it. The caution folded itself up and went away, and he dropped to one knee in the dirt, and apologized for his manner at the gate. He'd taken me for a squatter, not a prince. Get up, I told him. An exiled prince on dead land doesn't need the kneeling. Treat me as a local lord. That's all I need. Then I did the thing my old life had taught me across 100 meeting tables. In a body that was ash in another world now, I gave him something before I asked for anything. I picked a tomato off the vine and put it in his hand. He bit it to be polite. Then he stopped chewing. His ears came up, and he looked at the tomato like it had personally insulted his career. In all his years and all his roads, he said, he had never tasted produce like it. Not at a noble's table. Not anywhere. I told him it grew on the land everyone south of here calls a graveyard. He asked about Gorm, where a man buys a golem, who I'd paid. I hadn't bought it, I said. I'd made it. He laughed, the careful laugh of a man who thinks he's being played. So I showed him. I picked a dead stick up off the ground, a gray thing no thicker than my thumb, and held it flat on both palms where he could see my hands were empty. Then I called the skill up and let it run. Auto creation. The wood moved. That is the only honest way to say it. The grain pulled long and straight. The bark sloughed off like water running downhill. The thumb-thick branch thickened and flattened and edged itself. And in the space of one breath, I was holding a wooden sword, balanced, smooth, a faint warmth coming off the flat where the change had passed through it. I turned it once in the light and handed it to him hilt first. He didn't take it right away. He just looked. A fox beastman who bought and sold across a whole continent, and for a moment, he had nothing smooth left to say. Under his breath, he started doing the sums out loud, the way men do when they forget there's anyone listening. A man who builds golems and reshapes matter barehanded, alone, on cursed ground. Turn that to farming, and his harvest would shame a small nation. Befriend him at any cost, before anyone else thinks to. I let him finish. We made the deal off the back of his carriage. My vegetables, the supreme kind, for seeds I didn't have yet and coin I could spend. He opened high, the way merchants do. I'd already read the rest of him. The size of the carriage, the cut of the coat, the guild he flew, the plain fact that he'd driven into a deathland on a rumor. I knew about what he could carry and what he could pay, and I set my terms right at the top of it, so the number felt like his idea and was entirely mine. He agreed before he noticed the road had been paved under his feet. He gave me one more thing as he packed to leave, and I think he meant it as goodwill toward a partner worth keeping. If I was looking for people, and a lord with 2 residents was plainly looking for people, there were refugees in the southwest forest, a village, scratched together by folks who'd run from a war somewhere else. Worth a look, he said, if I wanted subjects. I watched the carriage shrink down the gray road and turned the word over. Subjects. People nobody else wanted. On land, nobody else wanted. That had a shape I liked. I learned the rest of that conversation later, secondhand, after the fact. A few miles down the road, once the dead ground was behind them, a second man sat up in the back of Roland's carriage. He'd been there the whole time, folded under a cloth in the cargo bed. Clyde, a scarred, dark-skinned veteran the merchant never traveled without, a hidden blade for bad roads. Clyde was rattled, and from what I'd later understand of him, Clyde did not rattle. He told Roland the maid had known he was there from the first minute. The whole visit she'd kept her killing intent fixed on the cloth in the cart, a quiet promise that if he so much as twitched, she'd open the carriage and him with it. His spine, he said, hadn't been warm since. Then he said the thing that turned the whole picture over. He knew that maid, 2 years gone, wiped off every board and bounty. The swordswoman they'd called the Heavenly Sword, the highest-ranked adventurer alive, who'd climbed to the top of the world in 2 years and then simply walked off the edge of it. That was her, pouring sauce, carrying plates. Roland asked, half joking, whether Clyde could take her. No amount of the merchant's money, Clyde said, would put him in front of that woman, because he had no intention of dying on a dead road to satisfy a fox's curiosity. So Roland sat with it and came to the wrong conclusion in exactly the right direction. A prince with no gift, the joke of the court, the reject they'd shipped north to die quietly. And that same prince had a vanished legend-playing housemaid, built golems with his hands, and had outthought a guild merchant across a table without ever raising his voice. None of that is what a worthless man looks like. So Roland decided I must have faked it, thrown the right, swallowed the shame on purpose, engineered my own exile to get clear of a kingdom rotting from the crown down before it dragged me under with it. If that were true, Clyde muttered, the reject was already worth more than the king, and the kingdom, whatever it told itself, was going to need a man like that long before it ever admitted so. They were wrong about the how. I hadn't planned any of it, but they'd landed on something true and said it aloud on a forest road. A year before anyone in a palace would dare. The rot was already in the walls back home. When it finally reached the roof, the man they'd thrown away was the one they'd come looking for. I didn't know a word of that yet. I was just glad of the seeds. A week went by easy. The fields filled out, the bread kept coming, and the three of us settled into a rhythm that almost felt like a home. Then over dinner, Lila set down her fork and said she'd go find the refugees herself. The southwest forest, the village Roland had marked. She'd scout it, make sure it was real and worth the walk, and come back. I didn't love it, and I said so. "It's a forest full of monsters," I said. "You'd be alone." She pointed out, dry as ever, that the purified land kept the monsters off, that Gorm could flatten anything that wandered close, and that she hated losing the days with me more than I did, but the village's future was worth a few of them. When Lila decided a thing was necessary, arguing with her was just a slower way of agreeing. "Be back by dark," I told her. "I'll be back before you miss me." We both already knew that one was a lie. She left at first light, a bag over one shoulder and her sword on her hip, and was a small shape on the gray road before the sun was properly up. Gorm watched her go until she dropped over the rise, then turned his blank face back to me like he was waiting for orders. The house felt larger and worse with her gone. I'd lived 2 lifetimes around people who never really saw me, and somehow it was the one person who did that I couldn't stand the quiet without. I told myself it was a few days. Then I went to work, because work was the thing that had always carried me through the rest. I spent the morning in the rows with Gorm, running appraisal down the plants, checking growth, checking the soil, watching the blessing do its slow, quiet work in ground that should have been killing everything I put in it. Gorm alerted again, sharper this time, and took his stance. What came across the field was not a carriage, it was a wolf. White, the white of clean snow, and easily 5 meters from nose to tail. A thing the size of a wagon walking on 4 legs, and walking calm, like the field belonged to it. I'd seen plenty of impossible things since coming here. I had not seen anything look at me and think. Then it spoke. A woman's voice, gentle and amused, out of that enormous throat. She told me it was rare for a human to come to this land, and rarer still for one to make crops grow on ground this far eaten by the miasma. She'd done that well, she said, looking at the rows, well enough to drag an old thing out of its sleep. She named herself a divine wolf, a Fenrir, Luna, the last guardian of these lands. And then the last guardian of these lands began, very obviously, to drool. She asked, almost shy about it, for something that could have swallowed me whole, whether I might spare a little of the food growing on my purified ground. I have learned to read a room, and the room was a starving god. I went down the rows and pulled the ripest of everything, an armful, and set it down in front of her. She ate like the world was ending. When she finally lifted her head, she said it was the finest thing she had tasted in 1,000 years. And she did not say it the way you'd praise a meal. She said it the way you'd say a date, because she had been here 1,000 years. That was when she told me what this place was. The Deadlands hadn't always been dead. 1,000 years ago, she said, these were the richest lands under the sky, green to the horizon, before any kingdom I'd ever heard of existed to write it down. Then came a war, not a border squabble, a war so vast it drowned the whole north in miasma when it ended, poisoned the soil down to the bone, and left it the gray ruin men now sent there unwanted to die in. Everyone who could leave had left. She had stayed, because ruined or not, it was her home. I stood in my green rows on top of a 1,000-year grave and felt the size of the thing I'd wandered into settle over me. The curse I'd been beating back one hoe stroke at a time wasn't a curse. It was the ash of something enormous that had happened here and that nobody alive remembered. Nobody but her. She wanted to thank me. She said as much, and then she gave me a gift that did not match a basket of vegetables at all. She told me to hold out my hand and dropped into it a hand-sized ingot of metal that caught the morning light and threw it back wrong. Too bright, almost humming against my skin. Orichalcum, she called it. A legendary metal, the rarest there is. The kind a man could forge into a blade that cut through nearly anything. Appraisal confirmed it before I could doubt it. I was holding a small fortune, freely given by a wolf, for a few tomatoes. Then she changed. The white wolf folded down on itself, light running over the shape of her, and where the beast had stood, there was a woman, white hair to her waist, pale and wild and beautiful, with a wolf's ears set high on her head and a tail behind her. She stepped close before I could find anything to say, took my face in both hands, and granted me what she called the blessing of the divine wolf. A warmth went through me, clean and deep, and settled somewhere I couldn't name. Her eyes were wet, a grateful thing, and nothing more than that, but it was a lot, from someone who'd been alone with this land so long. She stepped back, pleased with herself, and told me she'd come again, and that next time she'd bring me something even better. Then she was a white shape loping off across the dead ground, and I was standing in my field holding a fortune in metal with my ears burning, with no idea what to do with my hands. Gorm made a low sound that I chose to believe was sympathy. It was full dark, and I was finishing the last of the day's work by lamplight when Gorm cried out, not the warning roar from before, but a confused, alarmed sound I hadn't heard him make. I took the lantern and went out. There was someone on the ground at the edge of the light, a young woman, near Lila's age, dragging herself the last few feet toward the house on her hands. Her clothes were filthy and torn, her arms scratched raw, and when she lifted her face into the lantern, it was gray and slick with fever. She got one word out, begging, help, and then her arms gave and she went down in the dirt. I was already moving. I got an arm under her and she weighed almost nothing, burning up against my side. Gorm came around without being asked and took her legs, gentle as a thing made of stone can be, and between us we carried her in and laid her down by the fire. I got water into her, got the worst of the cold off her, and sat back on my heels and looked at her in the firelight, another person who had come this far because every other door had closed. I'd been that. I'd been the thing the whole court turned its back on. I knew exactly what it was to crawl toward the last light there was, and pray someone inside still counted you as a person. Whoever you're running from, I said, low, to the fire, and to her, and to no one. They don't get you back. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know the thing that had chased her here would put a sword in my hand and a war on my doorstep. I only knew she'd come to the last living place in a dead country, and that I was not going to be one more man who looked at someone in trouble and decided they weren't worth the trouble. She woke a little before dawn, and the first thing she did was try to stand. I put a hand on her shoulder and kept her down. The fever had cooked her all night, and the scratches on her cheek had gone hot and angry under the dirt. Gorm watched through the window, too big to fit the door, his face pressed close to the glass like a worried dog. Drink this first, I told her, and pressed the cup into her hands. I had made it while she slept. Heelgrass and water, fed into auto-creation, and what came out the other side was a recovery potion that would have cost a year's wages in any town with a price for such things. She looked at the cup, then at me, and drank because she was too tired to argue. The change was fast enough to frighten her. The flush drained out of her face. The scratches closed. She touched her own cheek, found smooth skin, and stared at her fingers like they belonged to someone else. My name is Theo, I said. You're safe here. Now tell me what you were running from. Her name was Ivy. She got it out between long breaths, sitting up now, the color back in her, the torn dress still hanging off her, but the girl underneath put back together. She told me about Mosswood, a small farming place down in Vestonlands, a dozen wooden houses and people who had nothing left to take after years of bad harvests and worse luck. And now, goblins. A whole band of them had come down on the village to seize it by force and march every living soul off in a line. She had run for a city called Northwatch to beg for help, gotten lost in the deep forest instead, and ended up collapsing at the one door in a dead country that happened to have a light in it. I couldn't just stand there while they took everyone, she said, and her hands nodded in her lap. I know it was stupid. I didn't know where else to go. It wasn't stupid. She had walked through a wasteland on a guess. Most people I had known in 2 lives would not have walked across a courtyard. Here was the thing I kept turning over. I had been thrown into the Deadlands to die, written off as a man worth nothing, and I had spent every day since proving the people who did it wrong. And now there was a village full of people about to be treated as nothing, as cargo, as a thing you load onto a cart. I knew exactly what that felt like from the inside. I'll go, I said. Lila's going to skin me for going without her, but I'll go. Ivy started to thank me. I was already on my feet. I took her to the warehouse first. She stopped in the doorway and just looked. I had filled it over the months without quite noticing how much it had become. Stone, timber, iron, sacks of charcoal and gunpowder, racks of finished tools, rows of plain swords I had made on slow evenings to keep my hands busy. A whole campaign's worth of material, sitting in a shed in the middle of nowhere. Then I emptied it. I opened dimensional storage, and the warehouse went bare in front of her, shelf by shelf, the whole stockpile folding away into a pocket of space that wasn't anywhere she could point to. Ivy made a small strangled sound and grabbed the doorframe. Where did it all go? With me, I said. It's part of my gift. I can carry a town in my head and set it down wherever I want. She didn't really understand it. I didn't expect her to. What mattered was that she stopped looking at me like a kind stranger and started looking at me like a way out. Gorm knelt at the door so we could climb on. Ivy hesitated until she felt how solid he was under her. 2.5 meters of packed earth and stone that moved like a sprinter, and then she held on and pointed the way south. Raldwood swallowed us whole. The trees grew so thick the daylight came down in coins, and Gorm just lowered his head and ran, branches breaking across his shoulders like dry reeds. We had been going a while when the wolves stepped out, 4 of them, gray and lean, the kind that hunt in a fan and close the gap before you know there's a gap. They spread across our path and started walking us down, low and slow, and I felt Ivy go rigid against my back. Then they stopped. All 4 of them froze, ears flat, and bowed their heads to the dirt. A heartbeat later, they bolted, crashing away through the brush as if something far worse than us had walked into the forest. It took me a second to understand. Then I did. Luna's gift, the blessing of the divine wolf she had pressed on me, the one that bends every wolf-kind creature to its knee. I ran appraisal over myself there on Gorm's shoulders, the way you check a pocket you forgot you had, and found more than I'd gone looking for. The wolf's blessing, yes, but under it, quiet, the goddess's own blessing as well. Divine resistance, outrageous luck, a line that read like a promise and chilled me a little. The power to turn fate. I had been given more than I knew. That was a thought for later. Ivy was pointing through the trees, half rising, her voice gone thin. There, that's Mosswood. That's home. We came out of the trees into the middle of it. A dozen wooden houses, and goblins everywhere among them. 10 of the little green things, child-sized and quick, knives out, herding villagers like livestock and dragging at the ones who fought. They had come exactly as Ivy said, to take the place by force and take the people too. I didn't slow down. I sent Gorm straight in. He hit the goblin line like a landslide. The first ones went flying, end over end, and their knives skated off his hide without leaving a mark. The rest spun to face the giant and forgot the villagers entirely, which was the whole point. Under the noise, I called to Ivy, told her to jump on 3, and we went off Gorm's shoulder together while he was still moving. I made a bed in the air beneath us, just spoke it into being out of stored wood and cloth, a soft square that caught us both and folded us down into the grass. Ivy landed in a tangle and a blush. I was already up. Stay here, I said. I mean it. I'll bring them all back. One goblin had peeled off from the fight. It had a girl by the wrist and was hauling her toward the trees, and it was fast, faster than I could ever run. So I didn't run. I put a wall in its way. Earth came up out of the ground in front of it, chest high, solid, and the goblin slammed into it and lost the girl. It turned on me, furious, knife up, and came. I tripped it with a single stone block conjured under its feet, and while it was down, snarling, scrabbling to rise, I called for 100 more. They came out of the air above it all at once, half-meter cubes of gray stone, 100 of them, and they came down like a hillside falling. When the dust cleared, there was only a low gray mound where the goblin had been, and it was not moving, and it was not going to. My hands were shaking. I made myself breathe, but it was done. The girl was running back to her mother, my first fight, and I had won it with the only weapon I'd ever been any good at. Gorm finished the rest. He cut the band down until 2 of them broke and ran for the trees, swearing in their harsh little tongue that they would tell their boss, and I let them go. The villagers did not thank me. They circled up with spears and sharpened sticks, eyeing me and the giant I'd ridden in on, and the loudest of them, a broad man with a notched spear, leveled it at my chest and demanded to know if I was some new kind of monster come to finish what the goblins started. His name, I'd learn, was Jack. Ivy came tearing across the clearing before it could turn ugly. She put herself between us and shouted them down, said this man had saved her life and theirs, that the wall and the giant were his, that they should be on their knees thanking him instead of pointing wood at him. I didn't argue my case. I just started healing people. I brewed recovery potions out of stored hera grass, one after another, and went down the line of the hurt, and they watched the bruises fade and the cuts knit, and the fight went out of them all at once. By the time I straightened up, the spear was on the ground. Jack got there last. He didn't apologize so much as collapse into it, bowing so low his forehead near touched the dirt, voice cracking, calling himself a fool for aiming at the one man who came to help. Gorm, meanwhile, had 3 children hanging off his arm and was lifting them up and down with enormous care. He'd make a fine lord, someone said behind me, low. Better than the one we've got. I pretended not to hear it. I tucked it away instead. I was collecting reasons. The chief sent for me. His name was Bram, an old man with a fine white beard and the careful manners of someone who had spent his life keeping a small place alive. He put a cushion down for me and thanked me until I had to stop him. And then his face changed, and he told me the part Ivy hadn't known when she fled. The goblins I'd beaten were scouts, impatient ones. Their master was a goblin king, a thing bigger than an ogre, strong enough to hunt wyverns alone and clever enough to be cruel about it. It had already sent its terms: surrender the village by afternoon, or it would come and take everyone by force. And it was coming either way. in about 2 hours, with the whole horde at its back. Bram begged me to run. He said it plainly, with no shame in it. He said there was no winning this, that a kind stranger should not die for a village already lost, that I should take Ivy and the giant and go while the trees still hid me. I thought about it the way you think about a sum you already know the answer to. Running solved nothing. Goblins that take a village once come back for the next one, and the next, forever. I'm not going to run, I said, and neither are you. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind and asked gently who I really was to say such a thing. So I told him. I said my name was Theo, 3rd Prince of Highmoor, Lord of the Deadlands, and that these lands and the people standing on them were mine to protect, and I meant to do it. Bram went down on his knees on his own floor and wept and promised me anything I asked, and what I asked was simple. Keep the title quiet from the rest. Let them think I'm a traveling mage, and give me 2 hours. Then I built them a fortress out of a farming village. I had the people pull down the outer houses for the wood and the iron in their nails and their tools, and I drew the whole settlement in tight, a smaller ring with fewer ways through. They thought I was mad to tear down homes the day before a battle. They stopped thinking that when I raised the first watchtower, it went up in one breath. I spoke it and it stood, timber locking into timber, a platform high enough to see the tree line. Then a spiked fence around the whole shrunk perimeter, thorns of sharpened wood pointing out, the kind of thing that takes a crew a week. It took me the time to say it. The villagers stood in the gold light with their mouths open, and then, all at once, they were laughing and shouting and running for more material because hope had walked into the place and they wanted to feed it. I built fast and I built mean. Walls behind walls, firing steps for the spearmen, and down low, hidden behind a screen of timber where the ground sloped toward the trees, I set the thing I'd been saving the gunpowder for, a cannon. We were short on stone and iron, but powder I had, and a cannon does not care that the men behind it are farmers. Ivy found me between 2 of the walls. She had been getting the children and the old ones into the chief's house, and she had done it well, and now she stood there twisting her apron and finally asked the question she'd been holding. Can we really win this? I stopped what I was doing and looked at her, so she'd know I meant it. Yes, I said. You're not going to run again. None of you. I promise you that. By tonight, this is over, and you're still standing here. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me a moment too long, then nodded hard and went back to work. Jack went past at a dead run, with a beam on his shoulder and a grin on his face. The same man who'd had a spear at my chest an hour before. The light went orange and then red, and out past the fence, the forest went quiet in the way it does when something large is walking through it. They came out of the trees near 100 strong. The Goblin King walked them in. It stood over 2 meters, slab-muscled, a crown jammed on its head, and a machete the size of a door in one fist, and the horde flowed around its legs like dirty water. I learned later it had killed the scout who came crawling back to warn it, killed him for being weak, for daring to bring news of a setback. It was that kind of king. It expected a row of huts and a few terrified farmers. It got a wall, a tower, a line of men with spears, and a prince standing on the firing step looking down at it. For one long moment, it actually stopped. You could see the calculation stutter behind its eyes. I gave it one chance, because I am not the goblins, and I wanted the village to see the difference. I called down that it should turn around and take its people home while it still had people. It answered the way I knew it would, throwing back its head and roaring the order to charge, to trample the humans flat, to leave nothing. I waited until the front rank was close enough to count. Then I gave the word, and the cannon spoke. The blast tore a hole straight through the heart of the charge. Goblins went down in a heap. The rest faltered, and over the ringing in everyone's ears, I called out that the battle was ours to lose now, and to hold the wall. The first wave broke on the fence and died there. The villagers leaned into it, thrusting spears through the gaps, driving the goblins back onto their own thorns, and for a while, the wall held the way a wall is supposed to. The Goblin King ended that. It came through the press, sneering that this was no way to fight, that fences were for cowards, and it brought the machete down on the barrier, and the whole section blew apart, hurling 2 villagers off their feet. The horde surged for the gap. I sent Gorm into it. He met the king chest to chest and hit it with everything he had. One straight punch that lifted the thing off its feet and threw it clean back over the broken wall. Then he was swarmed, 10 goblins on each arm dragging him down, and the breach was open. I repaired it on the run, spoke the wall whole again, timber knitting across the gap, but not before about 10 of them slipped inside with us. I had something for that. I'd kept the small magic stones from the scouts I'd killed at first blood, and now I spent 3 of them at once and pulled 3 hunting dogs up out of stone, lean and fast, teeth like chisels. They went through the goblins in the yard in seconds. Then the king came back. It put its shoulder through my new wall and stepped into the firelight, and it found me. It told me, almost approving, that it had been watching the whole time and knew which one of us was the brain, that you win a battle like this by killing the man giving the orders. And it came for me. It was faster than anything that size had a right to be. I couldn't go sideways, couldn't go back. It had the angles. So I went up. 5 earth blocks slammed up out of the ground beneath my feet and threw me above the swing, the machete passing under me close enough to feel. And in the air, falling, I made the knife. I'd been carrying Luna's gift since the day she gave it, a hand-sized ingot of orichalcum, the legendary metal, the one edge in the world that would bite a thing like this. I poured it into auto-creation on the way down, and it came out a blade, and I came out of the sky with it, and I put everything I had behind one strike. The orichalcum went in clean. The Goblin King stopped. It stood there a moment, swaying, and then it went down, and as it fell, I heard it marvel, almost to itself, that it had been beaten by a human. The machete dropped from its hand. The horde, leaderless, broke and ran, and the dogs and Gorm chased the rest into the dark. I hit the ground hard after the blocks, and it knocked the wind clean out of me. I lay there in the smoke and the torchlight and listened. No more screaming. Just the villagers, slowly, starting to realize they were alive. I had told Ivy they wouldn't have to run again, and I had made it true. A whole village still standing, a war won, and a war king's stone lying in the dirt beside me, already cooling, already useful. I picked it up before I even got my breath back. I was a lord now, not because anyone in a capital had said so, because 100 people behind a wall I'd built were getting to their feet, and every one of them was getting to keep their life. Gorm brought his fist down on the last goblin, and the war was over before half the village understood it had ended. For one long breath, nobody moved. Then the clearing came apart with noise, people shouting, people weeping, people grabbing whoever stood closest and holding on. These were people who had spent days expecting to be marched off as somebody's property. Now they were alive, and the shock of that hit them harder than the fear ever had. Ivy reached me first. She crossed the churned ground at a dead run and threw both arms around me, and all the steadiness she had carried through the fighting finally broke loose in her at once. She sobbed my name into my shoulder. "It's all right," I told her. "It's over now, all of it. I am not good at being held onto." I patted her back the way you'd settle a spooked animal and tried not to look as awkward as I felt. By the time the moon came up, the fear had turned into a feast. They dragged out everything the stores still had and put all of it on the fire, because that was the tradition here. You survived a thing, and then you ate like there might not be a tomorrow to save it for. Cups went around. Bram raised the first toast, and his voice cracked on it. Ivy appointed herself in charge of feeding me. Every time I set my plate down, she filled it again, pressing roasted meat and dark bread on me until I had to hold the thing out of her reach and laugh. It was embarrassing. I also could not remember the last time someone had fussed over whether I'd eaten, and I sat there in the firelight letting it happen, quietly pleased and saying nothing. I had 2 things left to do, and the warmth of the night kept talking me out of both. I still hadn't asked Bram for his people, and I still hadn't told a single soul who I actually was. The decision got made for me. I never heard her coming. Nobody did. The tree line at the edge of the clearing simply broke open, branches snapping like dry sticks, and Lila came through it faster than anything that size should move and landed in the firelight without a hair out of place. She took one long look at Ivy, still hanging off my arm, and her expression dropped several degrees toward winter. She had tracked me, she informed the gawking crowd, by the direction of my voice and the scent of me on the wind, because a first-class maid would come running from the far side of the stars the moment her master called. Nobody knew what to do with that. Then, she did the thing I had been carefully not doing all night. She set a hand on my shoulder, lifted her chin, and announced to every face around that fire that this was her master, the supreme lord who ruled this land, Lord Theo, 3rd Prince of Highmoor. The cheering stopped like a cut string. I watched the joy go out of them, and something older take its place. These were Vance people. They had fled their own territory because the lord who owned it had treated them like livestock, and the word lord did not mean protection to them. It meant the boot. I had been one honest thing to them all evening, a traveling man who fought beside them, and now I was the very thing they had run north to escape. Bram saw it too. The old chief got to his feet and held up both hands and explained, slow and steady, why I had kept it quiet. That a stranger giving orders gets obeyed in a siege, and a prince giving orders gets argued with. And there had been no time to argue. It calmed most of them. One man near the back said what the rest were thinking. He'd heard all that, he said, and he was grateful, truly. But he had never once in his life seen a lord bleed for commoners, and he wanted to know what a prince really wanted from people who owned nothing. What the catch was. It was a fair question. I opened my mouth to answer it. Jack answered it first. He came up off the log he was sitting on like it had bitten him. This was a man who, hours earlier, had leveled a spear at my chest and called me a monster. Now he rounded on the doubter with his fists shaking and told him to shut his mouth. Lord Theo had stood in the line with them, he said, shoulder to shoulder in the dirt, and had healed his arm with his own hands after Jack had pointed a blade at him. And if a single person here still couldn't trust the man, Jack would have words with them he wouldn't enjoy. Ivy stepped in beside him, small and shaking and brave. She trusted me, she said. He wasn't the kind of person who lied. The doubter looked at the ground a while. Then he gave a short nod and stepped back, and that was that. Bram turned to me and asked, would the Lord say a word to his people? Gorm answered before I could. The golem lowered one huge hand flat to the ground beside me, patient, waiting, and I understood and stepped onto his palm, and he lifted me up where every face in the clearing could see me. I looked down at them, refugees, orphans, people the world had thrown out and written off, exactly the way it had thrown out and written off me. My heart was going so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I came north, I said, to a stretch of cursed dirt that nobody else wanted. They sent me there to die on it. Instead, I'm going to build something on it. And I came to this forest looking for the people to build it with. The clearing was dead quiet. I made myself keep going. I won't lie to you about what I am. I'm a prince of a house that decided I was worthless and threw me away. So I know exactly what it is to be looked at and counted as nothing. I am never going to do that to you. Come with me, and I swear on the only thing I have left to swear on that I will never betray you, and you will never have to run from anyone again. Lend me your strength. Let me give you a home. I ran out of words. The silence stretched until I was certain I had misjudged all of it. Then the back of the crowd broke first, and the roar came up like a wave and took the whole clearing with it, every voice at once, fists in the air, Jack bellowing loud enough to drown the rest, people who had nothing left throwing all of it into the sound. It rolled up over me where I stood on Gorm's hand, and I just stood in it, the discarded prince, being chosen out loud by people who had every reason in the world to know better. Then the relief hit me all at once, and my knees went out. I didn't fall. Lila was already there, of course, one arm catching me before I'd dropped an inch, holding me up like I weighed nothing. She murmured, low so only I could hear, that I had grown splendidly. Then, in the same breath and the same flat voice, she informed me that slipping off to a war without her leave had earned me a long and very strict stretch of extra chores, and we would be discussing the terms. I told her that wasn't fair. She looked away and pretended she hadn't heard me. Below us, the village was still cheering. I let myself lean on her and decided the chores were probably worth it. The feast burned itself out near morning, and I dragged myself to one of the new houses we'd raised from the old wall timber, and Lila came in right behind me. I was too tired to think about it. I just used auto-creation to put up a second bed against the far wall so she'd have her own. The bed lasted about a second. Lila's hand moved. There was a sound like cloth tearing, and the thing fell into two clean halves on the floor. Her hand had slipped, she said, not looking at me. I told her a hand does not slip in a perfectly straight line through solid wood. She studied the ceiling like it was fascinating and declined to comment. Then, to change the subject, she emptied a pouch onto the table, and a small avalanche of magic stones rolled out across it, more than a dozen, every size up to a fist. She'd never managed to find this place while she was scouting, she admitted, a little sour about it. So instead, she had spent the days killing everything in the forest that moved and keeping the cores. Fuel, she said, for whatever I meant to build. I took her hand without thinking and told her she was a huge help. She went red to her ears and announced it was late and we should sleep. This way, please, and would not look at me again the rest of the night. I lay there listening to the new village breathe outside the walls and thought, for the first time in 2 lives, that the future actually looked like something I wanted to walk into. The next morning, I went to work on the Goblin King's stone. It was the largest core I'd ever held, dense and dark and faintly warm, and a thing that size was far too rare to waste. I set it on the ground, fed it stone, and packed earth, and let auto-creation close over it. What rose out of the ground was leaner than Gorm, and harder-edged dark gray shot through with green-black veins, with 2 blunt fang-shaped ridges set along its jaw. It came up to its full height, looked down at me, and then knelt, the same way Gorm had knelt the first day, offering itself without a word. Lila walked a slow circle around it and told me, "Well done. There was strong loyalty in this one," she said, "the mark of good character." She suspected the stone remembered being beaten by me and respected it. She added that it wanted a name. I looked at those two heavy fangs and thought about the thing they'd come from. "Garm," I said. The golem's head came up, and it answered with one short rolling sound and bowed again, and that was its name. Around us, the villagers murmured and pointed, and somebody asked if this was magic, and somebody else said no. It was the goddess's power. It was just like Lord Theo, and they all decided to be amazed about it together. I wasn't about to leave my new people in a half-ruined refuge, so we were going home, all of them, to the living land I actually held. I crafted a great wooden carriage, big enough to take the old, the children, and the women off their feet, and about 20 of them climbed aboard. The other 20 or so would walk. Then I set my two golems to the traces, Gorm and Garm side by side, and a wagon pulled by golems instead of horses started rolling north through the trees. The forest itself was the problem. Raldwood is a wall of timber with no road through it. Lila solved that the way Lila solves things. She walked out ahead, drew once, and a shockwave came off the blade and felled a long straight line of trees, near 100 of them, dropping them clean to either side and leaving an open lane through the green. She glanced back to see if I'd been watching. I told her that was incredible. She said she was honored by the praise and failed completely to hide how pleased she was about it. I gathered the fallen trunks into dimensional storage as we went, then laid a smooth stone road down over the cleared ground so the carriage wouldn't bog, cut the trees, store the wood, pave the path, move forward. We did it over and over, mile after mile, the whole column following the road that appeared under their feet, and behind us, we left a proper way through a forest that had never had one. Half a day's travel brought us out of the trees and onto my land. The villagers climbed down and stood looking at the open ground, not quite sure what they were allowed to do with it, so I showed them. I pulled the stored timber back out, walked the layout Lila and I had marked, and started raising houses straight up out of the wood, one after another, set well apart, real homes with doors and roofs and hearths. That was when they broke. Some of them just stood and stared. Others put their hands over their mouths. A few sat down in the grass and wept openly, because after everything they had finally been handed a place that was theirs and that nobody was coming to take. The work cost me more than I let on. By the last house, my head was swimming and my hands shook. I kept building anyway. Bram found me when I'd finished. He thanked me, the old man's voice rough, and said his people would manage themselves. They were farmers down to the bone even after losing their livestock on the run, and he asked me to let them earn their place. Then he lowered his voice. There was a girl he wanted to recommend as the go-between for the village and me. Young, clever, well-liked, Ivy. He told me, quietly, that the epidemic that had passed through these parts had taken her whole family, every one of them, and she had no one left in the world. I knew that weight better than he could have guessed. I told him, of course, I'd look after her. By the time the sun went down, I was running on nothing. I'd trudged to my own house, wondering where Lila had got to, figuring she was as worn out as I was after dropping half a forest. I opened my door and stopped. Ivy was standing inside in a maid's outfit, a black and white dress that fit her badly, and an apron she kept smoothing with both hands. She looked up at me, went pink, and managed a small, nervous welcome home, master, like she'd been practicing it and still wasn't sure she'd got it right. Lila stepped out of the corner where she'd been watching, looked Ivy over, and pronounced the greeting passable, with room to improve. She'd had her eye on this one, she informed me. Good instincts, a maid's talent going to waste. So she had asked Ivy to come on as her subordinate, and Ivy had said yes gladly. And apparently, this had all been decided without anyone troubling to tell me. I should have been annoyed about that. I wasn't. I stood in my own doorway and looked at the two of them, the legend who refused to leave my side and the orphan who had nowhere else to be, both of them under my roof, and I thought about the house I'd grown up in, where I had been a rank and a disappointment and never once a person. This was nothing like that house. Nobody here owned me. Nobody here was using me up. They had simply, somehow, decided to stay. I'm home, I said, and meant it, and Ivy's whole face lit up. And for the first time in 2 whole lives, the word actually had somewhere to land. For the first time in 2 lives, I had a roof that was mine, and people under it who had chosen to stay, and I was content to keep my head down and let the capital forget my name. The capital did not forget my name. I learned that weeks later, in pieces, from Lila first, and then from the woman at the center of it herself. And when I fit the pieces together, this is the shape they made. On a long red carpet under a cold noon light, in the throne room I had grown up being overlooked in, my father was holding court. The realm's hero had come back from the field, and he praised her the way he praised anything the goddess had touched, loudly, and as if her worth were somehow a credit to him. Her name was Alice Scarlet. I had known her since we were small. The goddess chose her when she was 8 years old, and the kingdom took the girl and turned her into a weapon, and never once asked the person underneath how she felt about it. I had asked. We were children behind the castle when I found her crying because the masters had worked her hands raw and called it a privilege, and I sat down in the dirt next to the realm's chosen weapon and asked her, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, whether her hands hurt. No one had ever asked her that. That was the whole of it, really. I had treated her like a person back when no one else bothered, and she had never once forgotten it. So when my father sat there gilded and pleased and invited her to a grand celebration in her honor, Alice did not bow her head. Heroes have the right to stand before a king, and she used it, straight-backed on the red carpet while her two companions went tense at her shoulders. She let the flattery run out, and then she cut straight across it and asked him, plainly, about me. Where was his third son? Where was Theo? He answered without a flicker of shame. The way it reached me, my father spoke of me the way a man speaks of a broken tool he has already thrown out, that the goddess-forsaken boy had been sent north to the Deadlands, that the throne had no use for a failure, that the brat had surely choked to death in the miasma by now, and that it was no loss worth a second thought. He said it to the one person in the realm who would not let it pass. I am told the air in that hall changed. Alice's hand found the grip of her sword, and a single word left her under her breath. The kind of word that is not an insult, but an intent. Killing intent. In a throne room, a stride and a half from the king who had thrown me away. And then Sarah was already there. No one saw her move. Not the guards along the wall, not the courtiers, not my father on his gilded seat. One instant, she stood a body's length behind Alice. The next, she was pressed to her side with one hand clamped flat over Alice's hand and the hilt, holding the draw shut by force. She had crossed that distance in less than a breath, faster than any eye in the room could track, and the entire court went on standing there fat and oblivious, never knowing that steel had come a finger's width from leaving its sheath. The hero is tired from the road, Sarah said, smooth as still water, turning her face up to the throne with an easy apology. She thanked the king, declined his celebration on Alice's behalf, and walked her hero out of the throne room before the moment could turn into the kind of thing that takes heads. My father never felt how close the floor had come to opening under him. He went back to his afternoon. He thought the matter of his useless son was closed. In the corridor outside, the door barely shut behind them, Alice rounded on her. "You should have let me," she snapped. Sarah did not let go of her arm right away. "If you had put a sword through a king in his own hall, every head in our party would have rolled off the block beside his, mine included." She finally released her. "So no." Alice paced the length of the cold stone, furious, not bothering to keep her voice down where servants and guards could hear every word of it. "He never deserved this," she said. "He was worth 10 of the men in that room, and they had thrown him into the dead north to rot and then bragged about it over wine." She said it loud, and she said it as though daring anyone in earshot to disagree. And that was the moment, though none of them could have known it, that the lie about me first cracked in the open at the very heart of power. The realm's hero, calling the goddess-forsaken reject the best of them, in a royal corridor in front of witnesses. Sarah watched her wear a path in the stone, and the corner of her mouth tugged. "All this," she said, "over your beloved." Alice's whole face went red. He was not her future husband," she said, far too quickly and far too loud, which of course settled the matter in exactly the opposite direction. Sarah had the grace not to laugh out loud. Martina had been quiet the whole time, her eyes drifting down the corridor, and now she lifted a hand. "Someone is coming," she said softly. The warmth went out of the hallway. He came around the corner wearing the smile I knew better than anyone, the one that always meant he had already decided he had won, my brother, the second prince. The man who had not merely allowed my exile, but designed it, walked it through my father's ear, word by word, and signed it with that same smile. He greeted Alice with oily mock warmth, the way it was told to me, that it had been such a long time, that she was looking well, every courtesy bent just slightly into a taunt. moment. Then he reminded her, in case she had forgotten herself, that he was Prince Nolan and that his rank was owed her respect. Alice gave him none. So he came to the point, because patience was never his strength. The gist of it, paraphrased through every retelling, was this: that she should become his concubine. He reasoned it out loud like a merchant pricing a horse, that her fame, her face, the love the common people bore the realm's hero, all of it would be useful to him once he wore the crown. He was not offering her a place beside him. He was offering to own a popular thing. Alice told him she had no time to waste on him, and then, because he seemed to require it spelled out, she gave him 4 reasons. 1. She did not believe for a moment he would ever be king. 2. She was proud of her own work, of the people she had protected with her own 2 hands, and she would not trade that to decorate his ambition. 3. She would never, in any life, marry a man so wholly in love with himself. And 4. And I follow Theo, she said. Only ever Theo. That was the name that broke him. The way it was told to me, the smile came off Nolan's face all at once. He raged that everyone, kept throwing that failure's name in his face, kept asking after a boy who had nothing, demanding to know what was so special about a reject he had already beaten. And the air in the corridor began to scream, because my brother was pulling mana the way a flood pulls a riverbank. This is his gift. Great Sage, the goddess named it, and he was proud enough to announce it as he loosed it, that he held more raw mana than any mage alive, mastery over every attribute under the sky, the strongest sorcerer the realm had ever produced. Then he threw all of that at a girl in a corridor, a fireball, a real one, the kind that levels a house, straight at Alice's chest. Alice drew and cut it in half. One stroke. The spell came apart around her like split cloth and burned out against the stone to either side, and she walked through the scorch of it without breaking stride, unimpressed, almost bored. Borrowed power, she told him. Power a man only has because a goddess handed it to him. Power he never once bothered to train or earn was nothing to fear. He had leaned on his gift his whole life and learned nothing underneath it. And then she closed the last of the distance and slapped him. Not a duelist's strike, not magic. The flat of her open hand across his face with the full weight of a hero behind it. And my brother, the strongest mage alive, left his feet, crossed the air, and hit the corridor wall hard enough that the sound of it carried down the hall to every watching courtier who had drifted close to see the hero refuse a prince. He slid down the stone and sat there, one hand flat on the floor, the gold ring on it catching the cold light. And for one long-held moment, the whole court simply looked at the second prince of Highmoor crumpled at the foot of a wall. No one stepped forward to help him up. The hero he had tried to buy stood over him with her sword still bare and the scorch of his own spell smoking on the stone behind her, and not a single courtier moved, because every one of them had just watched what happened to the last person who got in her way. I am told that for him, the worst of it was not the wall, or the bruise blooming hot across his jaw, or the blood he tasted. It was the watching. He had spent his whole life certain that rank was a thing you were born holding, that the goddess had stacked the world in his favor, and that this made him better than the brother he had buried in the north. And now he sat on the floor of his father's castle with that brother's name still ringing in his ears, and a woman standing over him who had cut his greatest spell like ribbon and struck him down with one bare hand in front of everyone. The strongest mage alive, on the floor, beaten by the thing he hated most, being seen small, or so I imagine it sat in him. What I know for certain is what happened next. Alice did not gloat. She glanced once at Martina, and Martina stepped forward and quietly laid a healing on him. Not mercy, exactly. The swelling went down, the mark faded, every trace of the slap wiped clean off his face, so that there would be no bruise to point to, no evidence, no grounds for a prince to cry assault and bring the law down on a hero. They erased the proof and left him only the memory and the witnesses. Alice told him, flat and final, never to come at her or at Theo again. She called him repugnant. Then she turned her back on him and walked away with Sarah and Martina, and did not look back to see whether he got up. He sat there alone after they had gone, in a hall slowly emptying of the people who had watched it happen, with no wound left on him to show for any of it, and nothing healed underneath. What came up out of him then was not shame. It was a vow. As it reached me, he swore in that empty corridor that he would not forgive them. Not the hero who had humiliated him, and not the brother whose name had done it. He swore he would crush them both, grind them down into despair, make them regret the day they had made a fool of him at the foot of that wall. That was the thing I want you to understand about that day. The lie cracked. The whole capital, by nightfall, had a new rumor moving through it, that the realm's hero had drawn her sword over the goddess-forsaken reject and called him the best of them, and slapped a prince across a wall for his sake. The story of the worthless son began, finally, to come apart, but nothing was paid. My father felt nothing. He never even knew how near his own death had come, and Nolan walked out of that corridor not ruined, but humiliated, which for a man like my brother is a far more dangerous thing. He had thought of me, until that afternoon, as a problem already solved, a body cooling somewhere in the miasma. He stopped thinking of me as gone. He started thinking of me as something still alive that needed to be erased. Word came to me, eventually, of all of it, of the sword half drawn at a king, of the spell cut in two, of the slap that the whole court heard. I sat in my own house, in the land they had sent me to die in, with people around me who had chosen me, and I listened to the story of someone fighting for my name at the center of the world that threw it away. I did not feel vindicated. Not yet. Somewhere south of me, in a gilded room, my brother was beginning to spend everything he had to make sure I never proved him wrong again. And I went back out to my unfinished walls, because the only answer I had ever trusted was the next thing built with my own hands. The morning I closed the last gap in the north wall, I had both hands flat on cold stone and my mind already on the next thing. Then Luna came across the courtyard with 9 small shapes trailing her, and the wall could wait. She had told me once she was the last of the Fenrir in these lands. She had never mentioned children. They came out from behind her one at a time, white-furred and waist-high to me, and the moment they decided I was safe, they stopped being shy about anything at all. 8 of them hit me at once. I went down in the dust under a pile of warm fur and wet noses, and I did not try very hard to get up. Luna watched me get mobbed and looked deeply pleased about it. She said they were her late sister's children. She had no pups of her own. Her sister was gone, and that left 9 young Fenrir with nowhere in the world that wanted them. I already knew what I was going to say. I think she did too. They stay, I told her, with a pup steadily eating my sleeve. All 9. She crouched in front of me, eye to eye, and said I was exactly the man she had hoped I would be. Then she pressed a hand to my chest and renewed the old blessing she had given me, warm and quick, and announced she would be living here from now on as well, as if that were a thing I got a vote in. I did the arithmetic later, the way I always did. 9 more mouths. On land, I was still dragging back from the dead one field at a time. A sharper lord would have said no, but I had been the thing nobody wanted once, thrown north to die, because I did not fit a use somebody else had in mind. I was not about to learn that trick now. I had the walls. They could have a home inside them. One of them did not pile on. The smallest stayed at the edge of the courtyard, half behind a water barrel, watching the others wrestle me with eyes that wanted in and would not come. Luna's voice went quiet when she saw where I was looking. That one had lost its mother to the miasma sickness, days after it was born. It had never learned that a hand could be a gentle thing. Luna said the little one loved to run, and that if I wanted its trust, the fastest road was to chase it. So I chased it. I will not pretend it was dignified. I spent most of an afternoon running a wolf cub through my own town, and I had exactly one advantage it did not. I could build. When it cut down a narrow lane, I dropped a wall across the far end and turned it back. When it bolted up onto a roof to lose me, I raised a stone staircase under my own feet and went up after it. When it leapt the gap between 2 houses, I threw a walkway across the open air and ran the bridge while it was still deciding whether I would dare. The whole town became a playground. I was making one piece at a time, just ahead of a set of paws. It was the most fun I had had in either of my lives. Then, near the end, tired and overconfident, it misjudged a jump and came off the edge of a roof. I did not think. I put a springboard up under myself, hit it, caught the cub out of the air, and made a wide, soft bed rise out of the ground so we came down into it instead of onto it. The cub lay on my chest a moment, working out whether I had meant to do that. Then it licked my face, rolled over, and showed me its belly. I scratched it and remembered a dog I had as a kid, a whole life and a whole world ago, in a place where I worked myself into the grave and never had the time. I had the time now. Luna came and told me Fenrir take their names from the people they bond with, and that this one was mine to name. Its fur was soft past any reason a wolf should have, so I called it Silk, and the cub barked like I had handed it a kingdom. After that, I could not get out of naming the other 8, because they sat in a row and stared at me until I did. Over the next days, I named everyone and made each a collar of leather and iron with a little wooden plate, the name on the front, and the favorite food on the back, so the villagers could tell one white wolf from another. Luna asked, perfectly straight-faced, where her own collar was. I left the room at speed and did not give that the dignity of an answer. A week later, the merchant came back to find a city where he had left a hut. Roland of the Beastfang Trading Company had passed through once, when this place was one house, a handful of fields, and 3 of us standing on a dead plain. He came north again, expecting the same, maybe a shed or 2 more if I had been busy. He came over the last rise and found a wall. It ran across the plain in dressed gray stone, taller than the gate of the capital that had thrown me out, with turrets spaced along its top and iron cannons set into them. The gate itself was 2 great leaves of timber, bound in black iron, and it stood open. Gorm worked one side of it and Garm the other, the 2 golems swinging those enormous doors as easily as a man pushes shutters. Garm had a scythe slung across his back now, the head as long as a man, because a wall is only as good as the thing standing on it. Past them, the road was paved flat and even, no ruts, no mud. A fountain ran clean water in the square and threw it up white into the cold air. There were ordered houses with smoke going straight up off the chimneys, market stalls under awnings, a smell of bread and cut timber instead of the dead iron stink of the waste. There was a little park. There were children in it, playing, on ground that a year before had been gray poison that killed anything trying to take root in it. None of it had existed 7 days earlier. A man cannot hire that. A man cannot buy his way to a walled city in a week, no matter how full his purse. And Roland of all people knew it, because he had stood on this exact dead plain and seen the one house with his own eyes. I had his whole face to read as the carriage rolled through my gate, and it was worth a full year of being called worthless to the realm. The verdict had been simple and final, and spoken in front of a court. Here was a city standing on top of it, calling it a lie. His junior was a young canine beast woman named Anne, brown-haired, her ears gone flat, and she had given up pretending to be a professional somewhere back around the wall. She kept asking the air what this was, how this could be. Roland went the other direction entirely. He had gone very still and very upright, sweating in the cold wind, sitting the way a man sits when he has decided not to let anyone see him afraid. He told me, much later, that coming through my gate felt like walking into a demon king's castle. He said the worst part was that the demon king was smiling and offering him a drink. I took them into the manor, 2 full stories of it, and sat them in chairs soft enough that Anne yelped when she sank in. Ivy poured orange juice into clear glasses, oranges pressed that very morning from trees grown on ground I had cured with my own hands. Roland drank his in a single swallow and asked to buy the right to it before he had set the glass back down. Anne begged for a second and got it, then told the whole room she had never tasted anything so good in her life. Lila stood at my shoulder, composed as cut glass, and let them be impressed. Then we talked terms. I knew near enough what the Beastfang Company could lay on the table, and I set my price at the very top of it, not past it, exactly at it, the most he could pay and still walk out whole. He saw precisely what I was doing. I have never once paid full asking in my life, he said, and signed every line anyway. I suppose a man has to be robbed politely, at least the once. He took the whole deal, every condition, because the other choice was to lose his foot in the only door in the world that opened onto what I was making. While he was deciding I was worth being robbed by, the same news was already running south, toward the one man on earth who least wanted to hear it. I learned the rest of this the way I learned everything out of the capital, secondhand, and weeks late. My brother kept paid scouts watching the north. He had sent them, I think, expecting that one day they would ride back and tell him I had finally died on the schedule he had picked for me. Instead, they rode back and told him the Deadlands now held a walled living town full of people turning a profit. He did not believe them. He called the report a lie. Then he called it a swindle. Then he found a louder word for it and ordered it never repeated in front of him. The brother he had thrown away to rot was, by every account that reached his desk, refusing to rot. I am told he did the arithmetic too, in the end, and that the figures only got worse. The dead ground he had buried me in was already out-earning his own ventures. He could not make those numbers say a single thing he could live beside, so he stopped reading them. What he chose to do next, he did to make the truth stop being true, and it would cost him more than he had. But that was still to come. I should have felt finished. The wall was closed, the city was full, and the world had finally been made to look at it. Then Luna found me up on that wall at dusk and quietly took the feeling away. She was not teasing now. She stood beside me, looking north, out past everything I had cured, into the gray that went on without an end. And she said the miasma out there was getting thicker, not thinner, worse than when I came. I said that made no sense. I had been pushing it back for a year. The land was healing. She said that was the trouble. She turned from the dark only long enough to say the rest of it. The sickness can feel where it is being pushed. and things are starting to walk toward the one clean place, she said, instead of away from it. She had lived on this land 1,000 years. She had watched the monsters of the deep waste keep clear of people, the way any animal keeps clear of fire. They were not keeping clear now. Stronger things than anything I had ever fought were drifting in out of the far gray, slow and certain, toward the only purified ground for 100 miles in any direction, which was mine. My clean land was pulling the rot in the way a wound pulls a fever to it. The corruption was moving like it wanted something, she said, like the old thing buried under all that gray still had a will left in it. She would not say more than that, and whatever she was remembering, she kept it shut behind her teeth. I looked out into the dark with her and did the only thing I knew how to do about a danger I could not yet see. I started counting walls and weapons, and how fast my hands could raise more of both. Then, from the east side of the city, the alarm bell rang 3 times. I had built a city the world could not deny, and filled it with people and pups it had thrown away, and for about a week it had felt like the end of the story. The bell said it was not. I went down off the wall to meet whatever was coming out of the dark, and far to the south of me, in a gilded room, my brother was reaching for his purse. The bell had rung 3 times, and by the time I climbed the eastern wall, I already knew it meant something with teeth. A soldier met me at the parapet. One of the men, Lila, had drilled half to death over the winter. He pointed his spear out at the gray. Roughly 10 earth dragons, he reported, coming on fast, maybe 20 minutes out. I looked through the dust and found them. Low brown shapes with rock for horns, the wild kind they call rock horns, 4 heavy legs, and no wings, and no sense left in them at all. The miasma had eaten that out of them on the way here. Run the second plan, I told him. The one we drilled for, exactly this. He went. Roland had come up behind me, and a traitor who had crossed half the world knows what a rockhorn does to a town. He pressed me, low and fast, to get the people out the western road while there was still time. The city did not have the hands to hold 10 of those, he said, and I could always build it again later. Anne, his junior, blinked at the both of us and said, weren't earth dragons the gentle ones, the ones that pulled carts? Roland told her the tame ones are born tame. These were not those. I told Roland no. My voice came out flatter than I meant it. These people had run from their first homeland, then run from the goblins, then run again, and every time someone had told them it was only a town and they could build another. I was done teaching them that lesson. We were not running. Then I showed him why we did not have to. I pointed over the inner edge of the wall, down into the yard, where nearly 30 golems stood in iron plate among the soldiers, still as statues, waiting on a word from me. Roland counted them twice. Anne forgot to be embarrassed and just stared. Something dropped out of the sky and landed light beside me, white hair catching the wind. Luna had a habit of arriving from above when it amused her. She looked out at the rockhorns the way you look at weather and offered, cheerfully, to go tear them apart for me. I told her no and watched her start to pout, so I gave her the truth before she got going. The shelter under the city held every child and every old man we had, and I was handing it to her because it was the post I trusted least to anyone else. If she stood over them, the rest of us could fight without looking over our shoulders. The pout folded into a grin. She pressed a kiss to the top of my head, twice, called it a fair trade, and went bounding off toward the center of the city. Roland watched her go like a man who had seen a ghost stop for tea. He asked, careful, who she really was, because her bearing was nothing like any beast folk he had met. I told him plainly that she was a Fenrir, and pointed out the small white shape trotting at her heel as proof. He and Anne went very quiet, the quiet of 2 people filing away, a thing they would have to tell someone important later. There was no more time for it. The lookout called the herd into range. I gave my soldiers the only speech they needed, which was that we would win this, and then we would eat well, and that we had practiced enough that the eating was the only hard part. A few of them actually laughed, and the shaking went out of their hands. Then I gave the order I had been building toward all winter. Bring the cannons online. 4 black barrels rose on the turrets, and Roland had never seen anything like them because no one had. I had made them myself, drawn the shape out of my old life, and forged it from the realm's iron and the big magic stones I had been hoarding for a year. Only 4. The metal and the stones were dear, and 4 was all I could feed. 4 was enough. The rockhorns crossed the line. I dropped my hand. The volley went out with a sound that punched the air flat, magic for powder. Each shell a hammer dozens of times heavier than anything that ever left an ordinary gun. The gray in front of the wall came apart in fire and thrown earth. When the dust thinned, Most of the herd was simply not running anymore. The golems behind me did the loading, their stone arms swinging the heavy shells like loaves of bread. So my gunners only had to aim, and they aimed well. 2 of them came through it. They were big and they were fast, and the cannons could not catch them at the wall, so I sent the muscle out the gate. Gorm took the first one head on, caught its charge the way a wrestler catches a man, and put it into the ground so hard the wall hummed under my boots. It did not get up. Garm went at the second with the long scythe across his back, one clean stroke, and that one did not get up either. Garm threw his head back and roared, and my soldiers roared with him, and some of them were crying, the way people cry when they have lost too much and just won something back. Their first real win against the things that had haunted this land. I let them have the moment. I gave it about 4 seconds. Then a man on the lookout screamed and pointed at the sky, back the way the rockhorns had come, and I put the glass to my eye and counted red wings. The battle was not over. Something out in the gray was sending its second wave from the exact same door. Wyverns, red-scaled, wings where the forelegs should be, lighter than the rockhorns and a great deal harder to hit, and they came down on the city in a screaming fan. I called for the shells to be changed, the diffusion kind, the ones that did not need a direct hit. The cannons coughed again, and this time the shells burst in the open air and threw shockwaves through the flight, and most of the wyverns dropped out of the sky before they reached us. Most. 2 broke through the bursts and bent toward the wall. Lila stepped to the edge of the parapet without a word. My maid, who had washed the orange juice glasses an hour ago, drew once, and the draw was so fast it looked like a line of silver hanging in the air a moment after the blade was already back in its sheath. The nearest wyvern came apart mid-flight. The silver flash, she would tell me later, as if that explained how a household maid did that. The last one swerved off her and dove straight for the wall for me. I did not even have time to be alarmed. A girl came up off the ground to meet it. Up, not along. A single jump that should not have been possible. Crimson hair streaming behind her in 2 long tails. A longsword already swinging. The wyvern fell in 2 pieces. She landed on the parapet in a crouch, popped up grinning, and cheered for herself like a child who had just stuck a landing. I knew that grin. I had known it since we were small. Alice? My voice cracked on it. It was Alice Scarlet, the hero the goddess had chosen at 8 years old and raised into a weapon, standing on my wall in the dead north at the end of the world. She had heard, somewhere on the road, that the worthless third prince had been thrown out to die in the Deadlands. So she had come. She told me this in a rush, that she had pictured me out here alone and crying in the dirt, that she had crossed the whole realm to find me so she could comfort me. And now she looked past my shoulder at the paved streets and the running fountain and the people who were not dead, and her whole speech fell apart in her mouth. Her perfect plan, she wailed, completely ruined. 2 years. It had been 2 years since I had seen her, and the last time, no one in the capital had looked at her like she was a person except me. That was the whole reason she was standing here. She had grown, I told her. She had gotten really pretty, actually. She went red to the ears and demanded to know what I was being so cheeky about, which is how I knew she had not changed at all. 2 more came up the wall stairs behind her. Sarah, calm, a big sword on her back, and Martina under a witch's pointed hat, half hiding behind it. Sarah told me not to mind the lady. She was only shy, and then she dropped the thing that knocked the wind out of me worse than any wyvern had. When the second prince had mocked me at court in front of everyone, Alice had walked up and punched him in the face, my brother, the one who had built my exile and signed it with a smile. She had hit him for it, in the open, and damned her own standing to do it. Sarah grinned while she said it. Martina, soft and deadpan from under the hat, suggested the 2 of us just make it official and be done. I took Alice's hand. I do not know why, except that I wanted to. She turned a deeper red and did not pull away, though she easily could have, and that was its own kind of answer. Then a cool voice cut clean between us, and Lila was suddenly there, sliding herself into the half-inch of space between my hand and Alice's. The honored hero must be so very tired, she said, all silk and ice, and should really come and rest. Alice told her, just as sweetly, that she was full of energy. Thanks. Lila suggested she recover from her exhaustion quickly anyway. They smiled at each other. Sarah made a noise into her hand. I decided the dragons had been simpler. Lila found me before the feast and pulled me aside with a problem. The dragon meat was tainted. I went and looked, and under the good red of it, there was a faint black haze clinging to the cut, the same poison that lay over the soil out here. I had a tool for that poison, the divine hoe, the one I had made from the goddess's metal, the one thing in my hands that pulls the miasma out of dead ground and leaves it living. I had only ever used it on land. I touched it to the meat anyway. The black haze thinned and broke apart and was gone, and the cut red clean. Luna drifted over with a cup nearly as big as her head and a slab of the raw meat she had carved for herself. I had been carrying a small guilt about the dragons, about putting down a thing that had not chosen to go mad. She heard it on me before I said it. A monster the miasma has fully eaten, she told me, has stopped being itself. It is not sleeping in there waiting to be saved. It is gone, and the only kindness left is the ending. She said it the way you say a thing you have said for 1,000 years. Then she turned grave, and the warmth went out of the courtyard. She reminded me of what she had told me on the wall a week ago, that the poison was thickening, not thinning. And Alice, who had gone quiet beside me, added her own road to it. Everywhere she had traveled this last year, the monster tides were worse than any hero had ever recorded, and every tide was pushing the same way, north, toward us. I stood there with the clean meat in my hand and felt 3 separate things click into one. 3 waves of corrupted beasts in a matter of weeks, all from the same door, all aimed at the one purified place in the dead north. That was not weather. That was not bad luck. Something was driving them. Luna's old lore and the goddess's warnings said the same word in the end: careful and low. The way you say the name of a thing you would rather not wake. There was an old god buried under this land, sealed long ago, and the miasma was its residue, and it was beginning to surge because the thing under the gray was beginning to stir. My power was the only one in the world that could cleanse the very thing it bled, which meant, to whatever was waking, I was not a lord with a city. I was a wound it could feel. I asked Luna, quietly, whether I could hold against a thing like that. She did not answer me, and her not answering was the loudest thing I heard all day. But you cannot tell a city that has just survived to stop being happy. So I let them have their feast, and I let myself have it too. Lila and Ivy and the new maid girls had turned the dragons into a full table, steak and tail soup, and roasted thigh, and sliced cuts laid over greens, things these people had only ever heard of in stories. Lila set the best steak in front of me herself, the most marbled cut, and it was, honestly, the finest thing I had ever put in my mouth. Silk wound around my leg and looked up with the whole weight of a starving cub, so the cub got his own steak, and the cub was thrilled. Then the square began to chant my name, long life to Lord Theo, over and over, mugs in the air, some of them crying into the cheer. I sat there hot in the face and let it happen. Alice, beside me, asked me low why I had ever hidden a skill like mine in the first place, so I told her the part I had never said out loud. Back home, my father and my brother measured a man by one thing only, by what he could kill, and a son whose gift was building instead of breaking was a son worth nothing to them. If I had shown them what these hands could really do, they would not have loved me for it. They would only have found a sharper way to use me, so I kept it small. I made myself easy to overlook. It had felt at the time like the only way to stay a person instead of a tool. She asked then about Gareth, my friend, the commoner knight who taught her the sword, the one warm man in that cold house. I told her he was not here, that after she left, the nobles had hated a low-born knight standing too close to a prince, and they had sent him away to another region, and I had not been strong enough then to stop it. Alice swore at the lot of them and offered, half serious, to go punch the prince again on my behalf. I almost let her. I looked out at the square while she fumed. A whole city chanting the name of the boy his own blood had branded worthless and buried in the dirt. Out here, they cheered me for who I was. Back there, they had only ever asked what I could destroy. Lila chose that moment to slide a bowl of dragon stew in front of me and inform Alice, with great courtesy, that the hour was late and the hero should turn in. Alice told her not to interrupt. Lila mentioned, sweetly, that her own bond with me had grown rather close of late. Alice's mug came down on the table. I wished, not for the first time, that the two of them would simply get along, and I knew, watching them, that I was going to be wishing it for a very long time. The feast roared on around us, bright and loud and safe for one more night. And somewhere out past the wall, under the gray, the old buried thing went on waking, and it was still coming, and the worst wave had not arrived yet. Alice cornered me before the last of the wine was poured. She had been circling it the whole feast, and now she had her hand on my sleeve and her chin up the way she got right before she did something braver than she wanted to. She wanted to know exactly what was between me and Lila. I told her the truth, which was nothing she needed to lose sleep over, and she went red and said that was not an answer, and that from this day forward, she would be the one looking after me. Thank you very much, since clearly nobody else was managing it properly. Then she stopped. She pulled in a breath like a swimmer about to go under. Fine, she got out. I will just say it plainly. The alarm bell cut her in half. A watchman came through the crowd at a dead run, no breath left in him, and what he had, he spent on one word repeated: a monster. Coming this way. Enormous, he said, like a mountain that had decided to move. A turtle, a huge black turtle, walking straight for us. Sarah was on her feet before he finished. She named it without any hope of being wrong: the adamant turtle, SS rank, disaster class. She did not soften a single edge of it for me. A thing like that, she said flatly, was not something people were meant to fight. It was something people were meant to outlive by being somewhere else. She told me to take my city and run, tonight, while the slow thing was still hours away. I thought about the road these people had already walked, driven out of one homeland, driven out of a village by the goblins, told every single time that it was only a town, only dirt, only a thing they could put up again somewhere down the road, always somewhere else, always later. I was done teaching them that lesson. Sarah, you are right about what it is, I said, but how many more times are we supposed to run? If we run from this one, we run forever. I would not make them refugees again, not from their own ground. We would stand on it. Luna had gone quiet in a way the feast did not explain. She was watching the dark past the wall, her ears laid flat against her head. A beast that size, she murmured, does not walk in a straight line. It wanders, it grazes, it drifts after water and prey and the easy lay of the land. This one was coming dead level, mile after mile, like a stone rolled down a groove cut just to carry it here. Someone, she said, had pointed it at us. That went into me colder than the turtle did. A disaster does not aim itself. Someone had spent a fortune to set a walking mountain down on the one stretch of cursed dirt in the world that had started to bloom, and I knew the shape of the man who would pay that price to watch me buried. A man with the coin to do it, and the kind of grudge that does not cool. I kept the name behind my teeth. There was no proving it tonight, and tomorrow's mountain came first. I climbed onto the bench and told the square I was sorry to break their feast. I told them plainly what was coming, and I did not dress it in anything. Then I asked them, one more time, for their strength. They gave it. The same voices that had been singing my name an hour before answered like one throat. Leave it to us, my lord. We will win this one too. Silk pressed hard against my leg, too young to follow the words, and old enough to feel the whole room turn cold around him. The watchman put the thing at our walls by noon the next day. That gave us the night. I called the meeting and we went to work. Sarah laid the creature out flat for us, the way you lay out a problem you intend to solve. The shell, she said, was as hard as adamantite, the toughest ore there is. Cannons glance off it, swords shatter against it. Cut a limb away and it grows the limb back faster than you can ready a second swing. You do not beat the adamant turtle from the outside. Nobody ever has. A soldier asked the obvious thing. Why not just take the neck? Sarah almost smiled. The neck, she said, was the worst armored idea in the room. The plates there were thickest of all. There was exactly one soft place on the whole beast, and it only showed it when it chose to. When it attacks, it opens its mouth to spit a sphere of raw magic, and for that one breath, the mouth gapes, and the throat behind it is bare. Put something down that throat in that instant, and you kill it from the middle outward. Miss the instant, she said, and all you have done is show a mountain where you are standing. So that was the plan. Build the wall higher to break its line, set the golems to pin and slow its legs, and save the magic cannon for one shot, the one shot into the open mouth, in the breath it gave us. Then came the night. I built until my hands stopped feeling like mine. From the earth dragon and wyvern stones we had pulled off the last two waves, I shaped golem after golem, set them hauling stone, raised the eastern wall a man's height, and then another. Lila worked at my shoulder without being asked, fierce and dry and tireless, pushing bread into my hand and telling me to eat it, telling me the wall would hold, telling me I was no use to anyone face down in the yard. Gorm and Garm carried what 3 teams of men could not. We only ever finished the eastern side. It would have to be enough. The black sky over the dead land slowly went to gray. At first light I saw it. It came up over the horizon the way the sun should have, a black mass that did not end where a thing ought to end, and then went on, not ending. A mountain that walked. Each step carried it almost nothing, and carried it closer all the same, slow and patient and utterly certain. And the ground gave a low note under every footfall that I felt in the stone of the wall before I ever heard it. I had stood in a square full of people and told them we would fight that. Watching it come on in the gray, I finally understood the size of what I had promised them. Then my legs went out from under me, not from fear, from a whole night without sleep, and my hands run dry to the bone. The wall tilted. A grip closed on my arm and hauled me upright before I could go down the inside of it. Alice. Of course it was Alice. She told me most of the work was done and I should be asleep. I said I could not, that I was the one who had asked all of this of everyone, that I had to see it through. She looked at me a long moment, and something behind her face quietly gave way, and she did not argue. She just pulled me down to sit on the cold stone with my back against the parapet, and she folded down beside me, and for a while, neither of us said anything while the mountain walked toward us through the dawn. Then, she told me about being 8 years old. They chose me when I was 8, she said. Her voice had gone very even, the way a voice goes when it is carrying something heavy and does not want you to notice the strain. The goddess marked me, and after that, nobody ever looked at me again. Not really. They looked at the hero. They put a sword in my hands and a name on my back, and they paraded the name through every hall in the capital. And the girl holding the sword just stopped being there, to all of them. She picked at a seam on her glove. You learn to answer to it, she went on. The hero this, the hero that. Train harder. Smile for the priests. Be the thing the world needs. 11 years of it. I would lie awake some nights and try to remember if there was anyone alive who knew my actual name and meant me by it. The person, not the weapon. And there was one. She turned and looked straight at me. You are the only one, Theo. The only one who ever saw me. Just me. I knew the shape of what she was describing. I had been on the other side of the same coin my whole life. The difference between her and me was simple, and it was everything. I had had my mother while she lived. I had had Gareth, a low-born knight who looked at the boy and never once at the rank. 2 people had been enough to keep some part of me alive in that cold house. Alice had had no one at all, until, she said, a quiet prince at some dull function had wandered over and talked to her like she was only a person who happened to be standing in the room. She was telling me now, at dawn, with a mountain 3 miles out and closing, because she was not certain both of us would be on our feet by nightfall. We came down off the wall into a corner out of the wind where the new light was just starting to warm the stone. I remembered the first time I met her, a lonely kid, hemmed in on every side by adults who only ever saw the hero. I had not understood any of that then. I had just thought she looked like someone nobody was bothering to talk to, so I talked to her. It had cost me nothing. I told her now that whatever had grown out of it, she had been the one helping me all along, more than the other way round. She shook her head hard at that. That ordinary little conversation, she said, was the reason she was still herself at all. She had been so close to letting them file her down into a clean and obedient weapon. And the one thing she had held on to through all of it was that somebody, once, had treated her like a girl instead of a goddess's sword. Then she offered me a blessing. I knew what that was. It is the passing of strength from someone powerful to someone they care for deeply. Not a thing given lightly, not a thing given often. I knew what it would cost her and what it would mean, and I hesitated. She did not. Flushed to the tips of her ears and plainly furious about it, she told me to stop being so noble for 1 minute and let her do this. What passed between us in that corner, I am going to keep. It was not the thing the village would have teased us raw about for a month. It was quieter than that, and it went a great deal deeper, a warmth handed from her hands into mine, her forehead come to rest against me for the length of one breath, the strongest person I had ever known, letting herself lean her whole weight on someone for a single heartbeat. Then it was finished, and something in the middle of me sat steadier than it had in years. She did not pull all the way back at once. She admitted, fast and rough, like tearing a bandage off in one motion, that she had lied to me earlier, that she had never been the least bit reluctant, that she had wanted to be at my side far longer than she had ever let herself show. She said it, and her face dared me to make anything of it. Then she stood, and the hero came back up over her like a visor lowering, and she informed me that the rest of it would wait until after the battle. At the top of the stairs, she turned around. You had better live through this, Theo, she said, and there was no bravado left in it at all. I mean it. I will not forgive you if you go and die here. She was gone before I could put together an answer, which was, I suspected, exactly the point. I sat there 1 moment longer. Then I got up off the cold stone. I was going to win this. Whatever it asked of me, I was going to be standing at the end of it, with my own life still in my own 2 hands, so that I could answer what she had just handed me. By noon, it filled the world. Close up, it was worse than the horizon had let on. The shell rose like a cliff face that had pulled itself loose and gone walking, black and seamless, and higher than my highest tower. The head alone was the size of a house. Every time one of its feet came down, the whole wall shuddered under my boots, and a sheet of dust jumped off the parapet, and I stood there and watched the thing that one man had bought to erase me come the last slow stretch toward my gate, and my hands began to shake, and I could not make them stop. Then Lila took one of them, and Alice took the other. Lila did not look away from the monster while she did it. Lord Theo would see us through, she said, in the same flat tone she used for announcing dinner. He always did. Alice squeezed the other hand hard enough to hurt and grinned up at me like the mountain was a minor inconvenience. And besides, she pointed out, I had a hero standing right here beside me. The shaking went out of my hands. Thank you, I told them both. I am all right now. At my feet, Silk had flattened himself, trembling against my leg, and I crouched and put a hand on his head and promised him, quietly, that we were going to win. He believed me, the way only a young thing can. I looked back up at the mountain and made myself think instead of feel. Sarah's words from the night before came back clean and cold. You do not beat it from outside. The cannons were loaded with the convergence rounds I had forged to drill deep before they burst. Martina stood ready at the wall to sharpen the gunner's eyes past anything a man should be able to see. Gorm and Garm waited down at the gate, patient as the stone they were cut from. Every piece was where it needed to be. There was exactly one soft place on the whole walking mountain, and it would show me that place for one breath, one time, in the instant it opened its mouth to kill us all. I would be ready for that breath. I gave the order to hold, not to fire, not yet, to hold the line and wait and let it come close enough that when the moment cracked open, we could not possibly miss it. The mountain took one more step. The great gate groaned on its hinges. Every soul on the wall went still as carved stone. Behind me, deep underground, the people I had refused to turn into refugees were safe in the dark. Beside me stood a maid who was a great deal more than a maid, and a hero who had finally, at dawn, let herself be a girl. And in front of me, a disaster that someone had bought and aimed and paid a fortune to deliver was lifting its enormous head to open its mouth. I was not the boy they had thrown out to die in the gray anymore. I had a city at my back and every single thing in the world worth keeping locked behind its walls. And I was still standing on that wall when the mountain finally reached it. Let it come. The mountain reached the wall, and then the mountain opened its mouth. I had given one order all night, and only one. Hold. Do not fire. Wait for the breath. Every gun on that rampart sat quiet under my hand, while a slope of black shell the size of a hillside ground forward through the dust. Then the head came up, the jaw split, and light pooled at the back of its throat, deep and red. The same blast it had once used to scour a whole town off the map. Alice did not wait. She went over the parapet before I could catch her, cape snapping behind her, the hero's sword already lit. She hit the ground running and drove the blade into the nearest leg with everything she had. Sparks screamed off the shell, and when she pulled back, there was one shallow white scratch on a leg as wide as a house, and nothing else. The turtle answered. The head swung, the mouth angled down, and the gathered light came loose in a roar of heat, aimed straight at the spot where she stood. She was a half step too slow turning, and I was already shouting a warning that would never reach her in time. Then she was gone from the spot, yanked sideways out of the burn line, a blur of black and white with the hero tucked under one arm. Lila set her down a good 20 paces clear and let go like she was setting down a basket. Where Alice had been standing, the ground was glass. If you die, Lila told her, flat as a ledger, Lord Theo grieves. That is the only reason I came for you. Try to keep up. Alice opened her mouth to argue and shut it again. Fine, I owe you one. Below me, Gorm and Garm waded in to buy time. 2 tons of packed earth and gray stone apiece, throwing their weight at the legs to drag the great head away from the gate. Alice and Lila worked the gaps between them, quick where the golems were slow. It was enough. It was barely enough. The turtle pivoted, hauling its bulk around toward the noise, and that turn was the window Sarah had drilled into every one of us through the dark hours. Ordinary guns, I called down the line. All 10. Make it angry at the wall, not at them. 10 cannons went off in one ragged roll of thunder. The iron shot cracked against the shell and bounced away into the dust like flung pebbles, but they did their job. The head came around toward us, the mouth opening again to answer the insult, that red light climbing in its throat for a shot at the rampart itself. That was it. That was the one breath. Magic cannons, I said. Down the throat, now. Martina's hands were already moving. The 4 heavy guns had sat loaded and cold the whole fight, kept for this and nothing else. And as the gunners bent to them, her magic settled over their eyes and sharpened the world to a needle. 4 streaks of light crossed the gap at once and went straight into that open mouth. The blast came from inside it. For one heartbeat, the whole head swelled with light at every seam, and the sound rolled back over the wall and shook dust off every stone. The mountain staggered, one vast leg folded, the head sagged toward the dirt, smoke pouring out of the jaw, and for a single clean breath, I let myself believe it was finished. It was not finished. It enraged. The roar that tore out of it was nothing like pain. It was hate, old and patient and human-hating. And the folded leg slammed back down under it. The head came up trailing smoke. The whole mass of it turned and threw itself at the wall, not lumbering now but charging, far faster than a thing that size had any right to move, straight at the gate my entire city was hiding behind. I did not stop to think. I had already decided this in the night. "Sarah, you have command." I swung up onto Silk's back and felt him brace under me, shivering, ready. "Hold the wall. Do not send a single soul after me." She caught my sleeve for half a second and asked me what I thought I was doing, in the voice of someone who already knew. "Ending it myself," I said. "I am done spending other people's lives on a thing I can finish with my own 2 hands. Get behind the guns and keep my people breathing." Then I touched my heel to Silk's side, and we went over the wall. We went straight down the face of it. A Fenrir does not care which way the world calls down. Silk hit the vertical stone at a dead run and ran it like flat road, claws sparking off the masonry, the wind tearing the breath out of me, the churned ground swinging up fast to meet us. We came off the bottom of the wall and onto the dead earth at a flat sprint, and the charging mountain swung its head to find the one rider stupid enough to ride at it instead of away. Good. I wanted its eyes on me. I reached for the skill the goddess had buried in me so quietly it had cost me a public gift, and I put it into the ground. The dirt under its front leg simply was not there anymore. A pit opened, deep and clean, exactly where the next footfall came down, and the whole front of the beast lurched and dropped as the leg punched through into empty air. The charge died in a long, grinding skid, dust climbing in a wall around it, the great head pitching low toward me. That was the second thing I wanted. I reached again, harder this time, and a tower of stone came up out of the dirt under its chin. Not a wall, a column, driven straight up with all the force the skill could pour through me, and it caught the dropping head square on the soft point of the jaw and snapped it back. The sound was enormous, a deep, wet crack of stunned bone, and the mountain reeled, dragging its trapped leg, the head lolling for the first time since it had crested the horizon. My hands were already shaking. Building something that size, that fast, twice over, was like emptying a bucket through a pinhole. I sat low on Silk's neck and breathed, and held the skill ready, because the stun would not last, and I was not done. The turtle wrenched its leg free of the pit with a roar, throwing earth in every direction, and fixed its small, deep-set eyes back on me, furious, aware now. And from the corner of my eye, I saw 2 figures coming hard across the broken ground toward me, one in crimson, one in black and white, neither of them where I had told them to be. Alice reached me first, breathing hard, sword still smoking. "You absolute idiot," she said, which from her was something close to an endearment. Lila arrived a step behind her, not even winded, and put herself at my flank without a word. Behind them came Gorm and Garm, dragging their feet, the pale lights in their chests guttering low. Even golems run down. "I told all of you to hold the wall," I said. "And we ignored you," Alice said. "Now what?" I did not waste breath fighting it. I needed every one of them, and we all knew it. "The cannon was not enough," I said, watching the turtle shake the ring out of its head. "And now it has learned. It will not open its mouth again. It will not give us that breath twice." "Then how do we kill it?" Alice jerked her chin at the wall of shell. "We chip it for a year, and it heals overnight." Lila spoke quietly, the way she did when the thing she was saying mattered. "There is one way. When I pulled the hero out of the fire, I came in close under its body. The blast we put down its throat did not only burn the inside," she looked at me. "It split the shell. There is a crack on the underside, low on the belly, where the fire detonated inside the bone. The only break in the whole creature. The cannon made it for us. And there it was, the one breach in a shell that swords shattered against. The whole night, the held shot, the one risky throw down the throat. All of it had been buying that single crack without my even knowing it. Then we put it on its back," I said. "The plan came together as I said it, clean and whole. It has 4 legs. We take all 4 at once. Each of you a leg, hard enough to fold it, all on my mark, so it cannot brace and cannot heal in time. When the legs go, it goes over, and the cracked belly comes up to the sky." I looked at each of them in turn. "And when it does, I finish it. Do not look back at me. Do not try to help me with mine. Take your leg and trust me to take the last of it. Can you do that?" Alice grinned, savage and tired and glad. Watch me. Lila inclined her head, which from her was a contract signed in blood. The two golems straightened, the lights in their chests flaring back up out of nothing, because their lord had asked. Even Silk pressed his shoulder against my leg, done being afraid. The turtle got its feet back under it and turned on us, fully awake now, the head low and the eyes hating, ready to grind the lot of us into the dust it had been pointed at. Scatter, I said. Take your legs. And they scattered. I took Silk in under the belly of the thing, into the dark beneath the shell, where the only light was the thin line of the crack overhead, and I waited. Everything depended on the legs falling together. If even one held, the beast stayed up, and the crack stayed where I could never reach it. Now, I shouted, and the world came apart at the four corners at once. On the right front leg, Alice planted her feet and brought the hero's sword down in a single overhead arc, divine light pouring off the blade in a sheet, her whole body behind it. Great Brave Slash, she called it, and for once the name was small for the thing. The blade went into the shell instead of skating off it and bit deep, and the leg buckled inward under her. On the left hind leg, Lila moved so fast she was 3 places at once. Silver Flash, Triple Blossom, 3 cuts landing in the same breath as one. So clean, I only knew it was done because the leg simply gave, folding sideways like a felled post. I had stopped wondering long ago how a maid did things like that. Tonight, I was only grateful. On the right hind leg, Gorm set the new weapon I had built into his arm, a heavy iron driver I had forged for exactly this, and rammed the spike home. There was a crack of magic at the contact, a hard concussive bark, and the spike punched through and wrecked the joint in one strike. The leg dropped, 3 legs gone, 1 left, the whole mountain tilting toward the sky, and on the left front leg, Garm swung his great iron scythe with everything he had, and the blade rang off the shell and skipped away. The shell held, the leg held. His blow had only scraped the surface, and a short cry of shock came out of him. The first time I had ever heard a golem sound afraid. For one terrible breath, the beast hung on that one good leg. Alice could not pull back to help without losing hers. Lila could not break off without the same. The whole plan balanced on the one leg none of us could reach, and the head was already swinging down to crush Garm where he stood frozen. Then a shape came out of the dust the size of a wagon. White fur, silver eyes, a wolf grown vast and ancient, and I knew her even in that body. Luna hit the last leg without slowing, claws raking through the shell where iron had failed, and the leg came apart under her like wet wood. One strike. She landed past it, already turning her head as if to make sure no one had seen too much, and the mountain fell. It went over slow, the way a building goes over, the great shell turning up to the white sky, and the cracked belly with it. The one breach in the whole creature rolling into the light right above me. The whole world tipped. This was the breath, the only breath I would get. I poured everything I had left into the skill, every grain of it, and I pulled. I had built houses from dead ground. I had raised a wall through one night. This was none of those. I reached past all of it, back into a life I would never see again, to a tower I remembered standing over a city on the far side of death, a great spire of iron lattice that climbed higher than anything this world had ever dreamed of building. I gave the skill all of it at once. Every scrap of precious iron I had hoarded for a year poured out of me and into the shape, and the shape came up out of the dirt under the falling beast like a thing alive. A tower of riveted iron, narrow and immense and beautiful, drove straight up through the crack in the shell. It went in where nothing else could go, up through the one wound the cannon had made, up and up through the body of the disaster that had been sent to erase my home. And the falling weight of the mountain drove itself down onto the spire under its own ruin. The beast did not roar again. The thing that had crossed 100 miles to kill us came down on the steel and did not get up. For a long moment, nobody moved. The dust climbed up the iron lattice and hung there in the slanting light, and the tower stood through the broken shell taller than the wall, taller than anything any of them had ever seen, raised by a hand, a thing out of a world none of them would ever know the name of. Up on the rampart, a soldier dropped his ramrod and just stared. Somewhere, a single voice started to shout, and then 100 voices caught it, and the sound came rolling off the wall and over the dead ground in a wave. They had watched a walking mountain come to bury them at dawn, and they were watching it lie still at dusk under a spire of iron, and they could not yet make themselves believe it. It was over. It was actually over. The strength went out of my legs all at once. The skill had taken everything. The night had taken the rest, and I felt myself going down off Silk's back before I could stop it. Lila was there. Alice was there. 2 pairs of hands caught me out of the dust before I hit it, one on each side, the way they had caught me on the wall the night before. Over their shoulders, I could see my whole strange family standing in the settling dust around a fallen mountain and an iron tower. alive, every one of them, and I thought, with no drama at all, the way I had thought it once in a cold carriage going north. Good. They let me rest only a little while before I made them help me up. I had to see it. A man should look at the thing that was meant to be his grave. We climbed up over the ruin of it, past the iron spire still standing through the broken shell, to where the great head lay open and still. The dust had stopped moving. The city behind us had gone from screaming to silence to a low rising sound that I slowly understood was cheering. And out here, on the wreck, none of us were cheering at all, because Lila had found something in the ruined skull, and she had gone very quiet, and quiet was never a good sign with her. It was fixed against the bone of the spine, half melted into it, a sphere of black metal and pale crystal wound through with gold, and with rows of fine-cut runes. I climbed down to it on hands that would barely hold me, and I knew what it was before I touched it. Appraisal told me the rest, but I did not need the rest. I had grown up in a palace. I knew the work of the most expensive artisans in the world when I saw it. A device for breaking a will, a thing that could reach into a great beast and take the reins of it and point it, mile after mile, in a dead straight line, at a single spot on a map. Luna had read it right at the feast. A creature that size does not walk a groove. Someone had cut the groove. Someone had reached down into a docile mountain and turned it into a weapon and aimed it at my home, meaning to wipe my people and me off the dirt in one afternoon and call it a natural disaster. I knelt there in the wreck and turned the thing over with one finger and did the only arithmetic that mattered. A device like this cost a fortune, not a rich man's fortune, a royal one. There were perhaps a handful of people in the whole world who could have paid for it and arranged it and kept it quiet. And out of that handful, exactly one of them hated me enough to spend it on a brother. One of them had stood over me at the gift rite and watched our father brand me worthless. One of them had tried to take Lila from me on the way out the door just to see my face. One of them had sworn, smiling, that I would be lucky to last a winter in the gray, my brother, Nolan. I said the name once in my own head, and the whole exhaustion in me went cold and clean and still. The relief of surviving drained straight out and left something flat and quiet behind it. Not rage. Rage is loud. This was the other thing. I thought about the gift rite and the word our father had spoken over me in front of the whole court. I thought about the carriage north, the green dying out of the land. The winter Nolan had promised would be my last. I had told myself for a year that the exile was only neglect, only a brother throwing away a thing he did not value, and I had made my peace with being thrown away. This was not neglect. A man does not pay a royal fortune to forget you. He had not wanted me gone from his sight. He had wanted me gone from the world, and everyone I had gathered around me gone with me. A whole city of people he had never met, burned down to dirt because their lord was the brother he could not stand to know was alive. I turned that over once and set it down, very carefully, in the cold place where it would keep. Alice asked me what it was. I told her, plainly, because she had earned the truth. A weapon, bought and aimed. Lila already understood. I could see it in the set of her shoulders. Luna had come up beside us in her own shape now. The wolf put away, and she looked at the device a long moment and then said only that she had taken one leg because the moment asked for it, but that she could not be seen doing such things often, for there were larger eyes in the world that turned toward anything that shone too bright. Then she fell silent too. I closed my hand around the device and pulled it loose from the bone and put it away into my storage, out of sight, where it would keep. Because there would be no confrontation here. There was no one to confront. The man who had paid for this was hundreds of miles away in a warm hall, certain by now that his most expensive purchase had done its work, that the reject was finally ash, that the Deadlands had swallowed me the way he had always promised they would. He did not know yet that his weapon was lying broken under an iron tower. He did not know yet that I was still standing. I looked back at my city, at the wall that had held, at the people coming out through the gate now into the late light to see the mountain that had not killed them. A year ago, they had thrown me out to die on cursed dirt, and I had built a home on it, and now they had spent a king's fortune to bury that home with me inside it. And even that had become only one more thing I had survived and one more thing I would keep. He would come to see the ashes himself. Men like my brother always came to gloat, and when he did, he would not find ashes. He would find me, but that was not for today. Today, the disaster meant to erase me was dead by my hand and my family's hands. And somewhere out beyond the wall, There was already talk of butchering the thing for the city to eat. The monster turned to a feast. The grave turned to a table. I let them carry that thought ahead of me. I stood a moment longer over the wreck, with the cold truth folded away behind my teeth. And then I let Lila and Alice take me down off the mountain, back toward the gate, back toward the noise of people who were alive. Let him come. The last thing I remembered was the cold, the wreck of the turtle, the dust settling, that small, ugly device heavy in my fist, and the flat thought that my brother would come to see the ashes himself one day, and that when he did, he would not find ashes. He would find me. Let him come. Then there was nothing for a long while. Then a low gold light, and a ceiling I knew, and the weight of someone's forehead pressed hard against my shoulder. Lila. She had her arms around me before I was fully awake, and she was holding on the way you hold something you had already decided you had lost. Lila does not do this. In all the time I had known her, I had seen her kill without changing her face, and I had never once seen her cry. Her shoulders were shaking now, and she was trying very hard to make me believe they were not. I'm glad, she said into my collar. I'm really glad. I told her I was sorry for worrying her. It was the wrong thing to say, and the only thing I had. She pulled back, wiped her face with the back of her hand as if I would not notice, and went straight to scolding me, which was how I knew she was all right. How long? I asked. A full day and most of a night, she said. I had poured everything I had into that last build, and the body collects on that kind of debt. While I slept, she had not been idle. The adamant turtle was finished, fully. Its meat was already hung and packed in the cold store she had me build from magic stones, and its shell and bones and the rare parts under the plating were locked away as well, because every scrap of that monster was worth more than the treasury of a small kingdom. The thing they had sent to erase me was now my larder and my fortune. I lay there and let that sit. She brought me a bowl before I could get up. Turtle stewed soft with potato and carrot and onion. No rank smell to it at all, the meat falling apart against the spoon. I had expected to have to be polite. Instead, I ate the whole bowl and asked, honestly, for more. It's good, I told her. It's really good, thank you. She looked away fast, but the corner of her mouth gave her away. I was still tired enough that standing took a moment of negotiation with my own knees, but I was not going to lie in bed while my people threw a feast in my name. I went out into it. They had taken the square apart and rebuilt it as one long table. There were cook fires going the length of it, and the smell of that soup everywhere, and children running between the benches. And when somebody saw me in the doorway, the whole noise of it turned and came at me at once. People I had pulled out of a dying village. People nobody else had wanted. They were cheering for me in a place that was supposed to be my grave, over a monster that was supposed to be my killer. I had spent 2 lives being looked through. I did not entirely know what to do with being looked at like this, so I just walked into it and let it happen. Roland found me first, the way merchants always find you first. The fox-eared trader gripped my hand in both of his and told me, beaming, that he was simply delighted and that he meant it for once, without the price already moving behind his eyes. Thanks to me, he could finally bring real dragon materials to market, he said, and turtle besides. And there was not a trading house on the continent that would not come north to deal now. Anne, I almost did not recognize as a guest. She was in the thick of the villagers, laughing at something. A flower someone's child had jammed crooked behind her drooping ear, completely at home. The clumsy junior clerk Roland had brought along had somehow become one of ours, while my back was turned. Then a smaller body hit me at the ribs, and I knew without looking it was Alice. She hugged me hard, the realm's celebrated hero with her arms around the kingdom's discarded prince, and then she remembered herself and sprang back with her face going the same red as her hair. I told her the truth, because she had earned it. The blessing she had given me before the battle, the hero's blessing, was the reason any of it had worked. It had taken my building skill and made it pour faster and bigger than I could have managed alone. Without her, there was no tower and no kill. If I won, I said, "It's because of you, Alice." She told me, looking anywhere but at me, that it had been embarrassing to give and it had better have been worth it, and that she would renew it now so I would stop looking half dead. She put her hand against the center of my chest and the warmth went through me, steady and quiet, and neither of us said anything about how long her hand stayed. I had never been given anything like this before, not warmth handed over freely, with nothing owed back. I had grown up in a palace and learned young that affection there had a ledger. Out here, on the dirt that was meant to kill me, people kept giving me things and forgetting to charge for them. I was still learning how to let them. That night, I fell asleep and woke standing up. There was no floor and no sky, only white going on forever, and the goddess waiting in the middle of it the way she had once before. Hestia, gold-haired and warm, her wings folded behind her, pleased with me the way a person is pleased who has been watching a long time. She had seen all of it, she said. The wolf I saved, the people I pulled out of the goblins, the dragon I drove off, the mountain of a turtle I had brought down. She was proud of me, and she said the word plainly, and it landed somewhere under my ribs that the people who were supposed to say it to me never had. She was not alone. Beside her stood a taller figure in gray and silver, calm as a drawn blade, and Hestia introduced her as Athena, goddess of war, the one who grants the hero her power, the one, I understood, who had made Alice what she was. Then they told me the thing they had brought me there to tell me, and the warmth went out of the room. There was not one goddess. There were many. The church taught the world there was only the one, because gods with rival followers make rival armies, and they would rather lie than watch men die in their names. That was the small secret. The large one was worse. The old war was not a story. The poison in this land, the miasma my skill could eat and no one else's could touch, was not an accident of geography or a curse without an author. It was residue. It was what was left behind, soaking down into the ground for 1,000 years by something that had been sealed at the end of that war and never destroyed. They gave it a name. They called the sealed god Hades. And the seal, they told me, was wearing thin. He was beginning to stir, the miasma thickening, the monsters coming in greater and angrier waves, the dragon, the turtle, all of it was not bad luck arriving one disaster at a time. It was one thing waking up. The very poison I had been quietly cleaning off my fields, season after season, thinking it was the worst of my problems, was the breath of a god. I stood in that white nothing and felt how small the brother who exiled me suddenly was. A man with a grudge and a fortune, and underneath the whole world, this. They did not ask me to fix it. They were too honest for that. Hestia only pressed more divine metal into my hands. The rare God-forged stuff she said came from her own private store, the only thing in creation that could work the cure at scale. Both of them laid a hand on me and renewed the blessing, and Athena, grave and even, asked one thing of me directly. Look after Alice, she said. The girl pushes herself too hard, because no one ever taught her she was allowed to stop, and the road ahead is long and very dark. I promised I would do my best. Then the white came apart, and the war they had named stayed exactly where they left it, out there, ahead, not for tonight, but coming. 3 days later, Roland was ready to leave. The monster trouble had kept him north far longer than he had planned, and his wagon was loaded, and he stood by the wheel doing the thing merchants do where they say goodbye and quietly take inventory of you at the same time. He was sorry, he said, that he could not buy the turtle materials off me outright. He had already emptied his purse on the dragon parts, and a fortune that size would have to wait for his next run, when he would come back heavy with coin and with cloth, which was the one thing this corner of the world could never get enough of. Then he asked me a simple question and stopped me cold. What was this place called? I opened my mouth and found I had nothing. I had raised houses out of dead ground, built a wall, dug a cold store, killed a disaster, gathered 100 people who called this home, and I had never once given the home a name. A noble's land usually takes the name of his house, and I could hardly hang my father's house over my gate. You seem troubled, said a voice from the wall above us, and Luna was there, the way she is always suddenly there, white-haired, silver-eyed, far older than she looks. She had a name for it. She said this land had carried one before, in the age she remembered, and the rest of the world had forgotten, back when it was green and crowded and rich. They had called it Regalia, she said, the land of kings, where many crowns once gathered. If I meant to bring it back to life, she could think of nothing it deserved more. Regalia. I said it once out loud, and it fit. I gave the village at its heart its own name too, Haven, after an old city Luna spoke of, a place where every kind of person had once lived side by side, and none of them had been turned away. It seemed like a promise worth building toward. Anne came puffing up late, arms full of vegetables the villagers had pressed on her way out, held up at every door by people who did not want to let her go. And here, Roland sprang the thing he had clearly been planning for days. He asked plainly if Anne could stay. Not as a clerk he was abandoning, he said quickly, when her ears went flat and her eyes filled, and she started to ask what she had done wrong. As Haven's first shopkeeper, he thought she was too soft for the cutthroat markets down south, and far too good with people to waste there. Here, she would bloom. I told her she was welcome, and that we would be glad of it, and that she did not have to prepare a thing. I put my hand to the ground at the edge of the road, and I built her a shop where she stood, walls and counter and shelves rising clean out of the dirt in the space of a breath. She cried, of course. Then she wiped her face, set her jaw, and swore she would live up to it. I believed her. A dead wasteland the kingdom had sent me to die in, 3 days from being nameless. Now it had a name, a town, a shop, and a future. Let them try to call it worthless. He came in the spring, the way I had known he would. The reports reached me before he did. My brother's spies were never as quiet as he believed. Word had finally crawled south that the reject was not dead, that the cursed land was thriving, that the fortune he had spent on the mind-controlled monster to wipe me off the map had bought him nothing but a corpse that was not mine. And Nolan, who had spent his whole life unable to stand the existence of me, could not stand this either. He had made a vow once, at the start of all of it, that he would deal with me himself. So he came to keep it. He came expecting to stand over my body in the ash and finally feel like the better son. I went out to meet him at the gate. I did not bring an army. I did not need to. The army was simply where it always was. He rode up the road in a carriage worth more than the village he had been told to find here, and the carriage stopped well short of the gate because the man driving it had seen the walls. My brother climbed out to gloat over a graveyard and found himself standing at the foot of a nation. I watched him take it in. The wall, higher and cleaner than anything in the capital. The gate. Behind me, Gorm and Garm stood like two gray hills that happened to have shoulders, and they were only the front of a standing army of them. Luna sat at my left in her own shape, with the patience of something that had watched empires rot, and the cub silk leaned warm against my leg. Lila stood at my right hand where she always stood, and beside me, in the white and crimson the whole continent knew on sight, was Alice Scarlet, the realm's hero, the goddess chosen blade every kingdom had begged for, standing of her own free will at the side of the brother he had thrown in the dirt. Nolan looked at all of it, and his face did a number of things very fast. He reached for the old script, because it was all he had ever had. His words, "I will not give you whole," because they did not deserve the room. He sneered that it had to be a trick, that a giftless reject could not have built so much as a fence, let alone this, so someone else must really be in charge here, and I was playing at it. He told me the crown still owned me, that a prince is the kingdom's property wherever he runs, that I would come to heel because I always had. The cruelty was all still there. It simply had nowhere left to land. Alice answered him before I did. She stepped a half pace forward, looked my brother up and down once, and spoke to the men he had brought as much as to him. "This is the man your kingdom threw away," she said. "Take a good look." Lila did not even draw. She only said, flat and certain, "I chose to follow him. I'd choose it again, and let him remember that she was the maid he had once tried to take from me, standing here, having chosen." He stopped arguing with the world and tried to win the one fight he thought he still could, the one against me. He drew himself up, and he reached for the sentence he had been saying to me in one shape or another since we were children, the truest thing he had ever believed. "You are a stray dog playing at being a king," he said. "Strip away the wolf and the witch and your little toys, and you are still the goddess-forsaken thing father threw in the dirt. You are nothing. You have always been nothing. You will always be nothing. And here is the part I cannot tell you from the outside, because for one moment the door of him swung open, and I saw straight through. Behind his eyes, the arithmetic he had lived his whole life by came apart all at once. He was the gifted one. He was the chosen son, the great sage, the one the goddess had marked and the father had loved. That was the floor he stood on, and he had built everything he was on the certainty that I was beneath it. And now the numbers would not add. The nothing had a hero. The nothing had a wall and a wolf and an army and a fortune in monster bone and 100 people who would die for him. And the gifted one had a spent purse, a failed weapon, and a carriage full of men watching him learn, in real time, that he had wagered his entire self on a lie and lost it. There was no rank to hide behind out here. For the first time in his life, my brother saw exactly how small he was, and there was no one left to tell him otherwise. Then the door shut, and I was just Theo again, standing in the afternoon, looking at a man I used to be afraid of. I felt none of the things I had spent years imagining I would feel. No heat, no triumph. I did not want to hit him. Hitting him would have given the moment to him, made it about his pain instead of my peace, and I was finished handing him things. "You came all this way to see a corpse," I said. "Look around, there isn't one." He started to speak, and I did not let the old reflex pull me down with him. I don't need anything from you anymore, I said. Not your approval, not your fear, not even your hate. That's what you can't stand. You only ever had power over me because I wanted you to see me. I don't need you to anymore. They already do. He had nothing. For the first time in our 2 lives, my brother stood in front of me with absolutely nothing to say. Go home, brother, I told him. There's nothing here that's yours. He went. He climbed back into the carriage that had carried him north to Gloat, and it turned around in the dead road that was not dead anymore, and it took him back the way he came, smaller than when he arrived. I let him go. The debt that began the day he had me, dragged out to die, closed right there, quietly, without my lifting a hand, not with blood, with the truth of everything I had built standing up behind me where he could not deny it. The reject was, finally and in front of witnesses, seen, but I watched the dust of him go south, and I did not pretend it was over. He was only the hand, the man who signed the order, who stood in his hall and named me worthless to the whole court, who had let his second son aim a god-touched monster at his third and asked no questions. That man still wore a crown, and the crown was rotting on his head, and there were already knives turning in that hall that had nothing to do with me. The Father's reckoning was coming. It simply was not coming today. I climbed the wall after he was gone and stood looking out over the thing I had made. Haven lay below me in the last of the light, smoke going up straight from 100 chimneys. The shop I had built that morning already lit. The fields past the houses showing green, where there had been only gray poison a year before. Alice came up beside me and leaned on the parapet without a word. Lila stood at my shoulder. Luna sat between the merlins with her tail curled around her feet, watching the dark gather in the north. I had won. The brother who threw me away had come to watch me rot and gone home, broken by what he found instead, and the wound he and my father had carved into me when I was a boy, the one that said I was a rank and a disappointment and a tool and never a person, had finally closed over. I knew who I was. So did everyone standing on this wall, but Luna was looking north, and I knew that look by now. The land was healing because I was cleaning the poison off it one field at a time, and the poison, the goddesses had told me, was the breath of something sleeping that was no longer sleeping well. Somewhere under the world, the thing they called Hades turned over in his seal, and the seal was thinner this year than last. The dragon and the turtle had only been the first of his dreams reaching the surface. There would be worse, and the cure for any of it, the only cure in all creation, was a skill the goddess had hidden inside the sun everyone agreed was worthless. To the south, a crown rotted on an old man's head, and a court sharpened its knives. To the north, a buried god stirred in the dark, and here on the wall between them stood a man with dirt under his nails, a hero at his side, a wolf at his feet, and a nation behind his back that had not existed a year ago. They had buried me in this ground to be rid of me. I had only just begun to build.